Chapter 33. The golden light was even more intense than the sun's rays. The initial ray of light seemed to have split into 2, then 4, and continued to split. The light dazzled Arbor until she felt dizzy. She struggled to wake up several times, but it was as if she was being held down by a gust of chi. No matter how hard she tried, she could not open her eyes. She was about to vomit from the dazzling rays of light. Her head was muddled and throbbing with pain. After an unknown amount of time, the rays of light in front of her slowly merged together and gradually transformed into a golden book that was half the height of a person. Xiaomu was dumbfounded. She stared blankly for a while, practically unable to figure out if she was still dreaming or if she was actually experiencing it. At this moment, the golden light faintly dissipated. One by one, golden words slowly jumped onto the cover of the book. Golden Talisman Jade Tome? Arbor actually understood the 4 large, flamboyant words in an instant. Golden Talisman Jade Tome? Could it be that she was still dreaming about this strange situation? The golden book flipped to a page on its own. Lines of small words appeared behind it, floating and disappearing at an extremely fast speed. Fortunately, Arbor's eyesight was superior and she could read 10 lines at a glance. The small words read, "At the beginning of all things, it carried the 2 energies of yin and yang. Interconnected and integrated, it nourished heaven and earth. If it did not connect, it would produce evil spirits. At the beginning of the universe, heaven and earth contained a vast divine power. The Golden Talisman Jade Tome was born at the same time as heaven and earth. Guided by divine power, it recorded the all-powerful talisman technique. Its attack could slaughter all things, and it could trigger the 2 evils of yin and yang. In the blink of an eye, cities would be destroyed and all things would wither. Its defense could stabilize divine sense and automatically activate the power to protect the divine soul. It could soothe all things in heaven and earth, and bring spring to withered trees. Arbor, haha. What a good dream. This Golden Talisman Jade Tome or whatever, it sounded like it was real. It might as well just say that it was invincible in both offense and defense. What was the vast divine power? What the hell was divine sense? Divine soul? Was there such a strange thing in this world? This was the first time he had heard of such a strange string of words. This lousy book, it didn't even know how to make it up properly. She could still believe it a little if it said that it could activate mystic energy and protect mystic consciousness. She could be considered as someone who had lived 2 lives. It wasn't that she hadn't seen a powerful talisman grandmaster in her previous life. However, there were only a few talisman grandmasters in this world. They were all old men who were hundreds of years old. The only talisman patrician family on Seekong Planet was far away in Guanlan City. The talisman grandmaster in the family wouldn't easily appear in the world. Moreover, talisman techniques were passed down from generation to generation, so there were even fewer talisman masters than mystic masters. Although the art of talismans was rather mystical, there was no talisman master who could annihilate a talisman with a flick of his finger. If things went wrong, the talisman master might have only thrown out 2 talismans before the mystic cultivator rushed up and killed him in a matter of minutes. Where did the ability to destroy cities and wither all living things come from? Are you sure you're not joking? The child scoffed and forced himself to wake up from the swaying golden light again. But the result made him feel a little sad. The Golden Talisman Jade Tome was emitting a heavy pressure that made it impossible for her to move, let alone open her eyelids. What on earth was this damn book up to? Our dear Xiaomu was so angry that she was forced to focus all her attention on that book. After the lines of small characters on the Golden Talisman Jade Tome were quickly annihilated, another page flipped over. Beginner-level talisman techniques? Why was this dream so realistic? Did it really record the heart and finger techniques for talisman techniques? Arbor was a little dumbfounded. His head was full of fog and bafflement. Chapter 34. When she wanted to take a closer look at it, she suddenly saw that large golden book suddenly fly up in front of her eyes. The golden book suddenly turned into powder. Layers upon layers of fragmented golden powder fluttered in the air and reformed into 12 jade slips. Like flowing light, they flew into her consciousness in an instant. Arbor immediately sat up from the bed with a whoosh. Her head felt as if it had been hammered by several large hammers for a while. It was so painful that her entire body was somewhat swaying. Arbor subconsciously reached out to hit her little head. Knitting her brows, she hurriedly sat cross-legged and pressed her hands down lightly. Her aura slightly sank as she condensed a strand of profound energy into profound consciousness. She carefully probed into her own consciousness, wanting to find out what was going on. With this look, the little fellow couldn't help but stare blankly. Other than the 12th grade feral that she had stored away earlier, her consciousness was originally empty. There were only a few strands of pitiful milky white profound consciousness that were about to die. They were like ghosts, drifting all over her consciousness. But now, what was going on with those 12 jade slips that had shrunk into a cylindrical shape? She remembered that this thing was definitely not something that she had stored into her consciousness on her own. So when she was unable to move and was paralyzed on the bed earlier, it wasn't a dream at all. Instead, there really was a foreign object that had brazenly barged into her consciousness? Strange. Arbor thought about it from beginning to end, but she still couldn't figure out where that golden talisman jade tome had come from. She had only been at home looking for homework, and then lying on the bed to rest for a while. How could she have inexplicably obtained a talisman inheritance like this? Ever since she had been reborn, it seemed like everything had become a little off. First, her profound energy had awakened much earlier than in her previous life. Next, her inner world was greatly different from her previous life. There were even more inexplicable things in her inner world. Now, even her consciousness wasn't right. How could her consciousness have absorbed that golden talisman jade tome without any precaution? If by any chance this caused damage to her consciousness, she wouldn't even be able to find a place to cry. No, shouldn't the main point be the origin of that golden talisman jade tome? How in the world did this thing suddenly run into her conscious? Xiaomu struggled to open her eyes, but she did not think for more than 3 minutes before her entire body once again fell backward, paralyzed on the bed. He didn't know if it was because this book had suddenly flown into his sea of consciousness, but his head was still hurting. I really want to sleep. Jojo. Get up, get up. Arbor opened his eyes in a daze and saw his mother's enlarged face. Oh my God. Just how tired are you? You've been sleeping since yesterday evening until now. Get up quickly. If you don't go out now, you'll be late for school. Wei Ziqing gently shook her little ignorant daughter, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Arbor took a deep breath and slowly got off the bed. He punched the headboard with his small fist. Boom. What's wrong, Jojo? Wei Ziqing heard the sound when she stepped out of the door. She couldn't help but turn around to ask. Xiaomu stretched out a pair of small claws to scratch her slightly stiff cheeks. She was about to go crazy from anger on the inside. F***CK. This apparition of the mystic conscious is really something else. Whose apparition of the mystic conscious doesn't properly cultivate in their conscious for the entire night, and only makes a fuss in their inner world for you. That strange apparition of profound consciousness also found a pen inlaid with gold beads from God knows where, and spent the entire night scribbling nonstop in their inner world. Her head still felt like it had been hammered back and forth by dozens of large hammers. It hurt like hell. Chapter 35. Arbor condensed a strand of mystic consciousness and quickly checked her own conscious. She immediately threw her small hands and jumped off the bed. This abnormal apparition of mystic consciousness had now decisively returned to her conscious, but she was still diligently using that gold bead pen to continue her scribbling. One had to know that she was constantly moving around like she had ADHD, which also consumed student Arbor's mystic energy. Couldn't she just stay in her conscious peacefully, and peacefully cultivate her mystic senses like she did in her previous life? Why was she scribbling over there? Arbor covered her small face. She would naturally learn how to draw talismans when she had free time. The main job of the apparition of mystic consciousness was to cultivate mystic consciousness. Was there something wrong with this apparition of mystic consciousness? Instead of cultivating mystic consciousness, she ran all day to draw talismans. She really wanted to beat her to death. Arbor stepped out of the door. With a flick of her finger, 3 strands of faint white light swept past. After the white light dissipated, 3 thin talisman papers lay quietly in her palm. Learning the Golden Talisman Jade Tome's talisman technique wasn't a dream. At least, the apparition of mystic consciousness was still scribbling like a little lunatic. These 3 talisman papers were also strange. They fell from the first jade slip, and should be something like a demonstration talisman. The ancient Golden Talisman Jade Tome was a friendly gift. The first one was a speed talisman. For 5 minutes it could increase one's speed by 3 times. It was essential for escaping. The second one was a strength talisman. It didn't increase mystic energy, but the strength of an ordinary person. For 5 minutes it could increase one's strength by 5 times. It would be easy to move mountains and rivers and kill a cow with one punch. The last one was more funny. It was called a repetition talisman. As the name implied, it could continuously do the same thing for 5 minutes. This talisman? Arbor turned it over and over in her hand and looked at it. A faint smile flashed in her eyes. It seemed a little interesting. These 3 talismans were all beginner talismans. Beginner and intermediate talismans didn't require mystic energy to activate. They were also quite simple to use. Ordinary people could use them as well. If it was a high-level talisman, it could only be used by injecting mystic energy. The more powerful the talisman, the more mystic energy it would take to open it. Most ordinary people without mystic energy could only look at it, and couldn't open a high-level talisman. High-level talisman masters were rare existences. In the talisman aristocratic family of Guanlan City, only 3 high-level talisman masters had appeared in the past 500 years. Of course, each one of them was a powerful figure. Arbor put the 3 talismans into her pocket and headed for Tiny Herb Hall with a bitter face. There were a total of 20 or so children in the village. The oldest was 15 years old, and the youngest was 5 years old. They were all stuffed into Tiny Herb Hall. There were only 2 teachers in the hall. Those over 10 years old were taught by Master Tsin, while those under 10 years old were taught by Master Jiang. Tiny Herb Hall was on the west side of the village, and behind it was a small path overgrown with withered grass that led straight to Hulun Mountain. Xiaomu planned to see if she could sneak up the mountain to scout things out. The little guy carried a bundle. As soon as he arrived at Tiny Herb Hall's entrance, he saw 2 porters carrying a bamboo rattan chair over. Sitting on the rattan chair was a little fatty around 9 years old. His chubby leg was propped up and he was happily gnawing on a chicken drumstick in each hand. 2 lackeys around the same age carried a few bags as they walked along the rattan chair. They held umbrellas and fanned themselves along the way. They smiled obsequiously and said, "Young Master Tao, are you hot? Young Master Tao, do you want some water?" "Chow would." The young master sitting on the rattan chair suddenly shouted. Chapter 36. Arbor was stunned. She turned her head to look at the chubby boy who suddenly sat up straight on the rattan chair. The chubby boy's eyes were almost squeezed together. When he looked at Arbor, he tried his best to widen his eyes, but they only opened a small gap. Xiaomu narrowed her chilly eyes, and fragments of her memories seemed to flash by. 3 days ago, it seemed that this chubby boy was the one who caused her to roll down the hill in front of the school. Seeing the chubby boy Zhou Tao's face, Arbor remembered that in her previous life, she had been bullied by this little bastard in the village. Although they were all trivial matters, the old and new hatred added together was enough to make a basket of grudges. She originally planned to ignore this little tyrant, but she didn't expect to be stopped by this little brat. Zhou Tao urged the 2 sedan bearers to carry the rattan chair to Arbor and put him down. He threw away the chicken bone in his right hand and gnawed on the drumstick in his left hand as he shouted at Arbor. "Coward, you actually dare to come here. If you hadn't chickened out that day, we could have gone up the mountain to explore." Xiaomu coldly glared at him before circling around the little fatty and entering the school, heading straight for her classroom. Teacher Jiang hadn't arrived yet. 13 or 14 children under the age of 10 were playing around in the classroom. When they saw Arbor walk in, they all stopped what they were doing and looked at her in unison. Arbor stopped in her tracks. She looked back and forth and frowned slightly. She couldn't remember where she had sat before. That childhood memory was too distant for her to remember. Xiaomu walked forward and picked the last short table before sitting down on the floor. She tossed the small package she was carrying onto the table. Zhou Tao's rattan chair stopped in front of the classroom. He had a look of disbelief on his face as he angrily walked towards Arbor. Arbor, you coward. Didn't you hear me talking to you? Was this damned girl crazy? She dared to look at him with such a cold gaze before, and now she completely ignored him. You're dead meat. Little Fatty glared at her fiercely, then turned to his classmates who were watching the show. He waved his meaty hands and said angrily, Everyone attack. Teach this brat a lesson for this young master, who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Let her know who has the final say in this village. Qiao Muan hurriedly and surreptitiously took out that repeat talisman from her sleeve, and looked at the little fatty with a sneer. Teacher is about to come. The headmaster is nothing. The fat boy grabbed the drumstick with his right hand and took a big bite. He raised his chin high and continued to talk nonsense. In this village, our family is the richest. Even the village head, that old man, has to give my father some face. Whoever had the money had the final say. Do you think the headmaster can save you? You're just a little reptile. How dare you look at me with such an arrogant expression? Attack. Beat this cowardly brat to death. But he didn't know that before he said this, Arbor had already thrown a beginner talisman at his chubby belly and ripped it open with his finger strength. The repeat talisman was attached to Fatty's belly through his clothes. Little Fatty didn't know that he was in high spirits, commanding his classmates to go up and beat someone up. Unexpectedly, an angry rebuke came from outside the window. What are you doing? All of you, stop! Headmaster Jiang walked in angrily. Looking at the group of disappointing students, he waved the rattan ruler in his hand. Go back to your seats. Fatty was dragged back to his seat with a face full of unwillingness. He turned around and glared at Arbor. Unexpectedly, the latter gave him a cold, wooden smile. In an instant, that smile was like a basin of cold water, directly splashing into the depths of his heart. Chapter 37. Seeing that kind of demon-like gaze, the little fatty shrank his neck in fear. When he turned back to look, he saw that the little girl was expressionless. There was no trace of that terrifying aura. For some reason, the little fatty felt for the first time that the little girl quietly sat in the last row of the classroom, as if she didn't belong to this world. She was so ethereal that it was somewhat inconceivable. He rubbed his eyes and angrily turned his head. He looked up and saw Teacher Jiang's black face and didn't say anything. Teacher Jiang gradually became intoxicated by the poems, and was in a wonderful mood. The students below were still quite well behaved. They shook their heads and recited the poems that Teacher Jiang was teaching. However, this harmonious atmosphere didn't last for more than 3 minutes. Arbor's lips curved into a faint sneer. He silently counted down in his heart. 5 for 1. Bang! Little Fatty slammed the table and stood up. This F***king loud sound made all of his classmates who were reciting pause in shock. Teacher Jiang, who was intoxicated by the poems, opened his eyes. He looked at the impudent fat child with a stunned expression. Ding 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 ding. The little fatty aggressively rushed in front of Arbor. He grabbed a handful of air with his right hand and fiercely chewed. He raised his chin high and looked disdainfully at him. Teacher Jiang is nothing. Everyone stared dumbfoundedly at the impudent little fatty. They all wondered if this little fatty was stupid. If Teacher Jiang wasn't present, then it was fine for him to act arrogantly. But now that Teacher Jiang was sitting there, he actually repeated the disrespectful words that he had said before without missing a single word. The group of kids under the age of 10 all looked at the brave warrior little fatty with eyes full of reverence. Before Teacher Jiang could fly into a rage, the 2 dumbfounded little lackeys hurriedly called out, Young Master Tao, and brought Zhou Tao back to his seat. Teacher Jiang took a deep breath. Seeing that the little fatty's father had paid for the renovation of Tiny Herb Hall, today, Teacher Jiang decided to swallow his anger. Go. Bang. The little fatty slapped the table and stood up again. He walked valiantly to Arbor and said, The headmaster is nothing. This time, the little kids really couldn't hold it in any longer. Ha ha ha, they all burst out laughing. Why did they feel that little fatty Zhou was especially funny today? Ha 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 ha. No matter how slow the little fatty was, He finally felt that something was wrong with his body. The feeling of not being able to control one's own body was truly terrifying. Looking at Teacher Jiang's darkened face, the little fatty slapped the table and stood up for the third time. Little fatty, who had rushed to Arbor and cursed, had a twisted expression on his face. His eyes, which had been squeezed into a slit, contained a trace of fear, and shameful tears overflowed from his eyes. Who could stop all of this? It was so terrifying. Why were his words and actions no longer under his control? Teacher Jiang couldn't take it anymore. He suddenly stood up from his seat, raised his rattan ruler, and smacked the little fatty's buttocks. Who told you to slap the table and stand up for the third time? Who told you to so brazenly insult Teacher Jiang? This good-for-nothing, you're really angering me to death. It was a good lesson, but in the end it ended with the little fatty fainting. As for the talisman that had originally been stuck to the little fatty's clothes, it fell to the ground as the time limit ended. It turned into 2 ordinary pieces of paper, and didn't attract anyone's attention. Arbor bent down to pick it up and crumpled it into a ball. He had a new plan in his mind. Tonight, when I get home, I'll draw 8 or 10 of them. Chapter 38. The next day, our dear Xiaomu went to school with 2 panda eyes, and on the way, she couldn't help but nag. Yesterday when she went back, she spent quite a bit of time just asking her second uncle's brother Xiao who to buy talisman papers in town. After snatching the talisman brush from her apparition, and chasing her away to cultivate her mystic sense, our dear Arbor didn't sleep for the entire night. She secretly drew talismans in the woodshed for the entire night, and out of a total of 30 talisman papers, 2/3 of them failed. In the end, Arbor drew 3 speed talismans, 3 strength talismans, and 4 repetition talismans. She felt that her life force for the entire day had already been exhausted in advance. Our dear Xiaomu sat at the back of the classroom with one hand supporting her chin, and her entire being was a little drowsy. At this time, a commotion came from the door, and 2 little lackeys called out, "Young Master Tao." Only then did Arbor realize that the little tyrant, Zhou Tao, had arrived. After being tormented so miserably yesterday, he still dared to come today. His courage was commendable. Arbor moved her little hand to her forehead, slightly turned her head, and swept a glance at the little tyrant from the corner of her eyes. Then she was slightly startled. The little tyrant's attire today, he wore a wide and plump sapphire blue silk robe, and a pair of black boots with wide soles. What was different from yesterday was that there was an extremely large coin-shaped jade tablet hanging in front of his chest, and the thick aura of a nouveau riche assaulted her senses. That round jade tablet hung heavily from his neck all the way to his abdomen, and the 3 large words "Protective Talisman" were written on it. It seemed like his nouveau riche father had spent a large sum of money to purchase this protective talisman. Speaking of which, in order to engrave complicated talisman characters on jade, not only did one need the support of profound energy, one also had to reach the level of a high-grade talisman master. According to her knowledge, in her previous life, there was only one person in the entire Seikong planet who could engrave talismans on jade. That person was from a talisman aristocratic family far away in Guanlan City. This little fatty's nouveau riche father was actually quite capable. However, when Arbor took a closer look, the corner of her mouth couldn't help but curve into a faint smile. She didn't feel the slightest bit of talisman energy from this washbasin-sized talisman. The crooked and messy fake talisman characters engraved on it were just broken characters that had been deliberately distorted, so that she couldn't read them clearly. In other words, little Fatty's father might have spent a lot of money to buy a fake protective talisman. Since there was no talisman power attached to the jade, it was just an ornament. It couldn't even be compared to the lowest level of elementary talismans. TSK, he surprised her for no reason, but in the end it was just a joke. Arbor curled his lips in boredom. Just as he was about to withdraw his gaze suddenly paused and fell behind the fat boy. A Taoist priest held a peachwood sword that could ward off evil spirits, and recited a string of words with conviction. Suddenly, the peachwood sword pointed in the direction of the black-faced teacher Jiang. He shouted loudly, "The 4 directions order demons and evil spirits to disperse. Evil spirits, submit quickly." Ha 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 ha. The children roared with laughter and rolled into a ball. Swish, 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 swish. The Taoist priest's sword dance fell into Arbor's eyes, and she almost laughed her teeth out. This messy and disorderly sword dance was really hilarious. Zhou Tao's father had been tricked again. She didn't know where this fake Taoist priest had come from. Little demon, quickly show yourself. The Taoist priest pinched a piece of talisman paper between his 2 fingers, and it fell into a bowl of clear water. This method of self-igniting without any wind immediately stunned the group of village children who had never seen the world. The Taoist priest opened his mouth and swallowed a mouthful of talisman water, and sprayed it all on the peachwood sword. As he pretended to take a step forward, he suddenly felt that he had stepped on something. He immediately slipped and fell to the ground with a plop. The Taoist priest's eyes bulged. He didn't have time to protect himself and fell head first. With a bang, his nose was almost crooked. Chapter 39. This was like poking a hornet's nest. The entire classroom was filled with the sound of children's laughter. The Taoist priest stood up with a red face. He met the young master Zhou Tao's suspicious gaze and immediately shouted sternly. He pounced in teacher Zhang's direction. Demon, where do you think you're going? Swish, swish, swish. The Taoist priest rushed in front of teacher Jiang and played with the peachwood sword. He waved the sword up and down, and his body moved along with it. He looked like he was using all his strength, as if he was really fighting with an invisible demon. Teacher Jiang was so angry that his face turned red. He dodged the Taoist priest's peachwood sword left and right. He was about to scold the Taoist priest. Who would have thought that the Taoist priest would not be able to act cool for more than 3 seconds? He fell to the ground head first. This time, he was really dizzy from the fall. 2 streaks of blood appeared from his nostrils. The Taoist priest was anxious and angry. He roared and jumped up. The peachwood sword fell to the ground with a clatter. He immediately felt that something was wrong. His big head seemed to be attracted by the earth's core and heavily knocked down. This cycle repeated. The group of children looked at the Taoist priest's miserable appearance of standing up and falling down again and again. They all felt a little frightened. There was a shocking similarity in history. The group of students began to realize that the same unlucky thing kept repeating over and over again. Didn't this happen to little fatty Zhou yesterday? Pung, pung, pung. After the Taoist priest fell again and again, his forehead was red. What was even more embarrassing was that his nose was bleeding, and it flowed all over his face. After a quarter of an hour, the miserable Taoist priest realized that his big head was finally no longer summoned by the earth's core. However, at that time, he had already been destroyed and lost his last bit of confidence. He stood up shakily. His face was covered in blood, and his eyes were bulging. He looked quite scary. The Taoist priest suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream as he stumbled out of the school like a madman. The peachwood sword was thrown behind his butt, and he didn't care about it anymore. The little fatty was so scared that his face was a little pale. He tightly held the wash-basin-sized protective talisman on his chest and ran 2 steps after the Taoist priest. He panted and shouted, "Sorcerer, sorcerer, why are you running? Sorcerer, sorcerer, come back. Don't forget that you took 100 taels of silver from my father. Too fierce, too fierce. The ghosts here were too fierce. Little friend, you'd better run quickly. This poor Taoist will not earn that 100 taels of silver." The Taoist priest wailed and howled as he left, leaving behind a group of students looking at each other in dismay. Teacher Jiang was so angry that the veins on his forehead were popping out. For the past 2 days, little fatty Zhou had turned the entire classroom upside down. How could he still be in the mood to teach? He waved his sleeves angrily and told the group of brats to scram. Arbor raised his hand and touched his nose. He had an idea. It was only 7 in the morning. Since the headmaster was not teaching, he might as well go up the mountain and look for the secret realm of Taoyuan. Arbor had already made plans beforehand, so when he went to school for the past 2 days, he brought with him a rope for climbing the mountain, a small shovel, a gourd to hold water, and other tools, so there was no need for him to go home. She dawdled until she was the last to leave the classroom. Seeing that there was no one around, she went around the back of the classroom to a small path overgrown with withered grass and ran up nimbly. This small path was more steep and desolate than the mountain path she had taken to bring the Tiandao sect. She had never walked this path in her previous life, so she really did not know where it led to Hulun Mountain. Arbor raised her head slightly and squinted at the withered forest that was gradually melting into the sunlight. Chapter 40. This Hulun Mountain encompassed the entire Kwoto village, so its range was relatively large. Arbor only vaguely remembered that the paradise that was discovered in her previous life was deep in the east of the mountain. However, she still needed to slowly explore the specific location. However, what she lacked the most now was time, not to mention that she was alone. If she wanted to search the mountain, it would be too unrealistic. Arbor sighed softly. The treasured secret realms could only be found by fate. It was up to the will of the heavens to find them. Half an hour later, a nimble little figure quickly flitted through the forest overgrown with withered trees, occasionally stopping to look back. Suddenly, Arbor paused, and her figure shrank back behind a withered tree. Holding her breath for a few seconds, Arbor gently poked her little head out, and her gaze fell on a small open space not far away. Looking from her direction, she could see 5 burly men in green sitting around the small open space that had turned into sand. Their physiques were very strong, and one of their arms was as thick as several of Qiao Mu's thighs. Their breathing was very slow, and they didn't look like ordinary people at first glance. This Hulun Mountain had been abandoned for so many years, and there were fewer and fewer living creatures in the mountain. Usually no one would go up the mountain. Therefore, it was very strange for these people to inexplicably appear here. Arbor carefully hid behind a tree and observed for a while. Then, she saw one of the burly men stand up with a bamboo tube filled with water, and take a few steps forward. "Ha!" The burly man let out a low command, and handed the bamboo tube to the person tied to the tree. That person was thin and tall, and his purple robe was loosely wrapped around his body. A white jade satin belt was tied around his waist, and his head was tilted as he leaned against the tree trunk. His pitch-black silk-like hair was rippling with water as it softly draped over his shoulders, completely covering his face. The burly man's voice didn't arouse the slightest reaction from that person. He even moved his head to the side in disgust and didn't approach the bamboo tube at all. A pair of red silk peony shoes gently landed on the sand, accompanied by a strong fragrance. Arbor hurriedly reached out to cover her nose and mouth, almost sneezing from that fragrant and stinky smell. "Duan Lang." Arbor's little body trembled slightly. God, why did this woman's voice sound like a chicken being strangled? It was so shrill that it almost pierced her eardrums. "Duan Lang, you haven't drunk a mouthful of water for 2 days. If this goes on, how can your body hold on? Come, I'll feed you 2 sips. The woman continued to speak in a soft and delicate voice. She walked forward and was about to reach out and lift the man's chin. Pooh. The man tied to the tree suddenly raised his chin slightly, and opened his mouth slightly as he avoided the woman's fingers. At the same time, the woman hurriedly pulled over a burly man beside her and placed him in front of her. Ugh! The brawny man let out a muffled groan. His sturdy body slid to the ground and fell to the ground with a thud. Arbor took a closer look, and saw that there was a long and thin nail in the man's throat. It was completely dyed red by the blood on his neck. The woman hatefully stomped her feet and called out sweetly, "Duan Lang, why are you so ruthless?" The other 4 brawny men who were sitting and eating dry rations saw the death of their companion. Their fingers slightly tightened as they grabbed the dry rations bag in their hands. They constantly rejoiced in their hearts. Fortunately, they didn't go forward just now. This dangerous person really couldn't get too close. Previously, they had more than a dozen brothers, and more than half of them had died in the hands of this hidden weapon. It could be seen how cruel this person was. If it wasn't for the special medicine that restrained him and made him only act up in a short distance, they would have all died by now. Chapter 41. The person tied to the tree slowly raised her head, and the messy hair covering her face slid down to her waist. Qiao Mu stealthily poked her head out, and caught a glimpse of a pair of slightly upturned peach blossom eyes. Beneath the long eyelashes, the ends of the eyes were slightly upturned. At first glance, the eyes were rippling with water, and the pitch-black pupils were very good-looking when they were upturned. However, upon closer inspection, the depths of the eyes were clearly flickering with the cold gleam of a blade. Looking at his age, he was no more than 12 or 13 years old. His thin lips were lightly pursed, and the corners of his mouth seemed to be a little chapped from not drinking water for a long time. Arbor shrunk her body and felt a chill on her neck for no reason. Strangely, why did she feel that the young man's gaze seemed to be drifting towards her? Absolutely impossible. She hid so well, who could discover her? Xiao Mu clung to the back of the tree like a small koala, her whole body curled up behind the wide withered tree. Duan Lang, the woman called out delicately. If this goes on, you'll die of thirst. You should listen to me and make do with a drink first. Scram. The young man's slightly deep and magnetic voice traveled far into Arbor's ears. The little fellow couldn't help but curiously poke her head out to take another look. In the end, abruptly shrinking her head back behind the tree, Arbor was dumbfounded and instinctively raised her hand to touch her chest. The moment she poked her head out, she felt that the young man's beautiful peach blossom eyes had directly caught her. It turned out that the feeling of being caught by someone's gaze wasn't her imagination. She clearly hid so well that even those burly men didn't discover her. So how did the young man discover her? He even used that pair of beautiful watery eyes that looked like they could cry at any time to accuse her of leaving him in the lurch. Haha, did she look like someone who would meddle in other people's business? What kind of joke was this? She wasn't in the mood to be a goody two-shoes anytime, anywhere. It seemed that there wasn't much to gain today. She should quickly wrap up and go home to eat, lest she got into trouble for no reason. Arbor was about to slip away when she suddenly heard the young man's gentle voice shouting in her direction. Sister, why aren't you leaving? Run. Run, run, run. Don't fall into their hands. What the hell? Arbor's little feet slipped just as he was about to run away. A hint of anger flashed across his stoic little face. This brat was clearly plotting against her. As expected, when the young man called out, the four burly men and the woman with the coquettish voice all turned their heads to look at where she was hiding. Arbor immediately tore a speed talisman, and his speed suddenly increased by 3 times. Like an arrow leaving the bow, she suddenly fled in the opposite direction. Seeing Arbor's burst of speed, the youth's eyes suddenly flashed. The 4 burly men were only stunned for a second or two before they chased after him like wolves and tigers. Xiaomu pulled out another strength talisman and tore it apart. She then kicked over, directly snapping the 2 withered trees in half. The upper half of the withered ancient tree whooshed through the air, sweeping towards the 4 burly men pursuing her. When the burly man running at the front saw this, he swung a fist at the flying dead tree. He originally thought that the dead tree would definitely be swept away by the wind from his fist when the two collided. However, reality was so shocking. The burly man clearly heard the sound of his fist breaking, and he immediately groaned in pain. Chapter 42. A bunch of useless fellows. The woman's seductive voice abruptly turned cold. Why aren't you chasing? You can't even deal with a child. What use do I have for a bunch of trash like you? Apart from the burly man with a broken hand, the other 3 hurriedly increased their speed and outflanked Arbor. The 3 of them surrounded Arbor from 3 different directions, and looked like they were about to catch her. Unexpectedly, the little girl exploded with an even more terrifying speed in an instant. That tiny figure practically transformed into an S-shaped bolt of lightning, and escaped from the 3 people's eyes like a thunderbolt. The 3 burly men were truly stupefied. They never knew that a little girl from a remote village could actually surpass them in speed. It had to be known that although these people were not like mystic cultivators who could easily split mountains, break rivers, and destroy cities with their supreme mystic energy, they were people who had been immersed in special potions since they were young and had cultivated extraordinary external martial arts. Compared to those ordinary people who lacked the strength to truss a chicken, they also had considerable strength. Generally, with their speed, they could almost match that of a level 2 mystic cultivator. The speed of those low-level mystic cultivators might not be able to surpass that of external experts like them. But now, this little girl from a mountain village in front of them actually had such an abnormal speed? This was something none of them had expected. How could they know that Arbor had consecutively torn 2 speed talismans? Her current speed could be said to be exceeding her usual speed. Everything was for the sake of escaping. She didn't think that she would have a good ending if she was caught by that woman with a soft and pretentious voice. Whoosh! Arbor expressionlessly dodged a withered branch, and then flipped a few times in the air to avoid 7 or 8 broken branches that shot at her. A trace of graveness gradually flitted across her small, stoic face. Ha ha! A familiar sharp laughter sounded behind her, causing goosebumps to rise all over her body. Arbor turned around and coldly met the woman's upside-down eyebrows. That woman was definitely not a beauty. Looking at her age, she should be more than 50 years old. She was wearing a bright pink dress, and her hair accessories and makeup were green and purple. She was dressed like a young girl, which was quite eye-catching. Arbor hadn't seen the woman's face before. Now that he saw her face, he almost threw up last night's dinner. How could such an auntie have the nerve to call a 13-year-old boy Duan Lang? Xiao Mu's small face was stoic as she looked at that woman, her eyes full of disapproval. Not running anymore? Little sister. The woman swayed her hips and giggled as she walked towards her. Oh, let me see. You're really a pretty little girl. The woman stepped forward and extended the sandalwood fan in her hand towards Arbor's chin. Arbor immediately took a step back from the strong fragrance, and his hand that was rubbing his nose paused. Achoo! Arbor looked at the woman with disgust and stepped back again. Go away. You stink. Stay away from me. Also, I'm not your little sister. At your age, you can be my grandma. Don't pretend to be young. It's too fake. You're not young at all. The woman's face, which was full of fragrant powder, seemed to have split open in the middle. The charming smile on her face completely disappeared in an instant. She had such a stoic face, but her tongue was so vicious. She was simply sinister at such a young age. Oofed. At this moment, the young boy tied to the tree let out an unkind laugh. This was tantamount to adding oil to the fire. The woman's expression cracked from anger, and a trace of gloomy killing intent appeared in her eyes. Chapter 43. Little girl, you're so young, but you've got guts. The woman sneered. Do you know that a lot of people end up dead because of their nonsense? Like you? Arbor crossed her arms and seemed to be standing casually in front of the woman, but in fact, she was on guard all over. The woman was furious, and the sandalwood fan in her hand suddenly turned into a sharp weapon. With a whoosh, she swung it towards Arbor's mouth. From the looks of it, this woman was quite annoyed with Xiao Mu's small mouth that could not spit out anything nice. So she viciously attacked in order to shatter Xiao Mu's mouth and knock out her small white teeth in passing. However, Arbor was already prepared. Seeing the woman wave her hand, she very nimbly dodged to the side. Her body was very petite, and she was also very agile. The direction she dodged to was exactly where a big man was standing. That big man looked at the sandalwood fan flying towards him in horror. Just as he was about to dodge to the side, he found that his body was somewhat uncontrollably stiff for a moment. It was in this moment of hesitation that his head was hit by the sandalwood fan. With a bang, his head exploded like a watermelon. The corner of Arbor's mouth curled up. Just now, she had thrown out a repeat talisman to restrict that idiot's movements and bought her that tiny bit of time. That was enough. No sooner said than done. Arbor had already flashed to the side of the little boy who was tied to the dead tree. The little boy probably didn't expect the little girl's movements and reaction speed to be so fast. His hands that were secretly moving slightly paused. Hurry up and help me untie. Bam. The little fist with the strength of 5 layers hammered his abdomen without hesitation. There was not the slightest bit of tenderness for the fairer sex. Just like that, a young man with a face as beautiful as jade was hammered by the little fellow's fierce punch. Together with half of the withered tree, he fell heavily to the ground with a thud. If one had to use 2 words to describe the young man's mood at this moment, then it would probably be F***ck. Heavens! The young boy was not in a good mood. Throughout the entire country, from the age of 80 to the age of 8, there was not a single female creature that could resist his smile. However, this young man was actually being cruelly destroyed by a stinky girl. If it wasn't for this ferocious punch that caused his internal organs to flip around, causing him to still be in pain, he would have thought that he was dreaming just now. This wretched lass How could she be so ruthless and cruel? However, now was not the best time to seek revenge on this damn child. The young boy struggled to get up from the ground. His hands were still firmly tied to the dead wood, but there was a black bead the size of a pigeon egg between his fingers. He turned around and threw the black bead in the direction of the delicate woman. At the same time, he quickly ran forward. A piece of rotten wood was erected above his head. Looking at his back, it was extremely funny. It was as if he was carrying a flagpole, but his running speed was not weak. Boom! Half of Hullen Mountain was awakened by this tremendous tremor. Many villagers of Kwoto village ran out of their houses in fright. They looked up in the direction of Hullen Mountain, not knowing what had happened. What was that? Arbor couldn't help but ask. However, the young boy turned his head with a horrified expression, and coincidentally met her expressionless little face. You? F***CK. She was caught off guard and didn't faint from the huge commotion just now? Even if he took 10,000 steps back, his speed was already at the limit. How could this damn child keep up with him? A crisp sound rang out as the black feral fiercely slapped the ladder's back, causing the youth who was caught off guard to stumble forward and almost fall headfirst onto the ground. The young man felt like vomiting blood at this moment. He had never seen a child as savage as Xiaomu, a soft and cute little girl with a heart as black as iron. This little rascal in front of him was probably the perfect description. Ouch, 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 ouch. The young boy was suddenly pressed down by Xiaomu, who had pounced on him. Her knees were pressed against his waist, and her left hand was tightly tugging at the rope that bound him. The black feral in her right hand was already touching the back of his head. Don't move. The young boy froze pitifully. Please, he didn't move at all right. What's your name? Xiaomu shouted. Their current posture was a bit strange. If it weren't for the current difficult situation, the young boy would really want to laugh. Your silly and cute voice doesn't have any deterrent power at all. Duan you. The young boy put on the appearance of a little white rabbit that would allow anyone to bully him. He pitifully twisted his neck with all his might and looked at her with a pitiful gaze. I am a good person. You don't look like one. The young boy almost broke down on the spot. Chapter 45. Ma. Troublesome. Could she not keep pressing against his waist bones in the same position? It really made people feel uncomfortable. Duan Yu turned his head, his peach blossom eyes brimming with moisture. He really did look a bit pitiful and pitiful. Unfortunately, the one facing him was little classmate Arbor. This little fellow didn't feel anything at all. Even if the other party's eyes kept shooting electricity at her as if they could talk, it was still useless. In her eyes, it was all the same whether one was good-looking or not. She stood up and tugged at the rope on the youth's hand. She pulled him up as well and walked 2 steps forward with a tug on the rope. Duan Yu was frantic on the inside. His hands were tied to the wood, so he reluctantly walked 2 steps and tugged at the rope behind him. Hey, little miss, can't we negotiate? Arbor's eyes flashed with anger, and she abruptly raised the ferrule in her hand. Want to resist? Don't. Duan Yu hurriedly blocked with his hands. His eyes hid behind his hands as he looked pitifully at the little girl. Don't hit. Let's talk nicely. Arbor tugged at the rope on his wrists. It looked like an ordinary brownish-yellow hemp rope, but it could bind his hands so that he couldn't break free no matter what. It could be seen that this wasn't an ordinary hemp rope. This is a mystic weapon? Arbor cast him a sidelong glance. Duan Yu's eyes flickered. He wondered who this little girl was. She was clearly a village girl, so how could she have heard of mystic weapons? Bam! Duan Yu fell forward and almost fell face first. It wasn't until he was sprawled on the ground that he realized he was kicked to the ground by that savage little girl. Can't you freaking have a bit of patience? It wasn't that he didn't want to answer, but he needed to organize his words. Ow. Duan Yu wanted to cry. He considered himself an arrogant and domineering person, but he didn't expect to meet an even more arrogant person today. A load of nonsense. Fine. Duan Yu. Mother, When did he speak nonsense? He hadn't spoken more than 5 sentences from beginning to end. Find. What? Duan Yu had just expressed a, "I don't understand your words," expression when he was greeted with a round of punches. The little girl really didn't hold back. Her fist was aimed at his handsome face, which was enraged by the heavens. Duan Yu was so angry that he almost couldn't catch his breath and fainted. Stop, 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 stop. Ouch, ouch. Damn, are all kids these days so unreasonable? When Duan Yu's gaze met the child's, he was taken aback by the bone-chilling chill in her eyes. He immediately jumped up and walked forward with a grumble. He didn't know where this child came from, but his entire body was filled with violent genes. If there was a disagreement, he would go berserk on the spot and attack his handsome face. How terrifying. Cough, you know where this is. Duan Yu felt that if he continued to play the fool, the child might really beat him until he became an idiot. The child glared at him with a, "You're talking nonsense" look. He waved his little paw and didn't even bother to say anything. Let me tell you, it's not good for you to feel like you've said a lot before you even finish half a sentence, and you're too lazy to continue. You have to treat it properly. You have to know, people can only express each other's intentions through constant contact and communication. Don't. I'll find. Don't hit me again. Cough, there are about 5 entrances to this mystic realm. Each entrance opens in a different way, and at a different time. Duan Yu paused and specially turned back to look at the child. However, he saw that she was expressionless. There was no surprise or emotion in her eyes. It was as calm as a pool of stagnant water, as if she already knew about this. Chapter 46. Arbor pointed at the pile of rocks in front of her, her slender brows raised. Her meaning couldn't be any more obvious. Stop blabbering and get to work. Duan Yu inwardly rolled his eyes. Not only did this little lass viciously order people around, but she also didn't allow them to talk too much. Where did this bad habit come from? Duan Yu sighed inwardly. I have a map in my inner world, but my hands are tied behind my back right now, so I can't look at it at all. The child glanced at his hands that were tied to the dead wood, and took a step forward. Duan Yu inexplicably took a step back, because he felt that the savage child definitely wouldn't be so kind as to untie him. Sure enough, this ferocious fellow actually flipped him over and forcibly twisted his arms, causing his bound hands to flip to the front. F***ck. It really freaking hurt. Duan Yu wanted to burst into tears and curse even more. However, in the next second, his forehead was hit by that dead wood that was erected in front of his eyes. He felt that his life was so bitter. With a hopeless expression, Duan Yu resigned himself to his fate, and took out a crumpled parchment map from his chest pocket. But that eyesore of a piece of wood. It kept swaying in front of his eyes, so he angrily turned to glare at her. Can you help me chop this eyesore of a piece of wood? How can I look at the map like this? Arbor glanced at his hand, but she didn't have any intention of snatching it over to take a look. She merely raised her eyelids slightly before quickly withdrawing her gaze, and pinching it in passing. Crack! A section of the wood was cut short, and the remaining half was tied to his hand. However, it didn't obstruct his view of the map anymore. Duan Yu felt more and more hopeless. He felt that he couldn't communicate with this fellow at all. However, Arbor ignored him and continued to ponder her own matters. Although she didn't know why it was like this, it was very clear that the mystic paradise that didn't appear until 3 years later in her previous life had already been discovered by someone one step ahead of time. However, Arbor frowned slightly and speculated in her mind. Perhaps a similar incident happened when she was 7 years old in her previous life, and someone had already come to the village to investigate the entrance to the mystic paradise. It was just that she was still muddle-headed at the time, and didn't know anything. Since the young man had a map in his hands, it was natural that he had sent someone to investigate before. Arbor found that the rope was quite useful. She could hold the boy in her hand and prevent him from escaping midway, and leaving her in this corner. Arbor was in a good mood, but the boy was extremely unhappy. He always felt that this little guy was holding his hand like a large dog. Ever since he encountered that old hag from the Coitus faction on the way, Duan Yu felt that his days had been extremely unpleasant. When he stopped, Arbor naturally stopped as well, and used his eyes to hint at Duan Yu. Here. Duan Yu felt aggrieved, and his anger was stifled in his chest. Did this imbecile have to be so lazy? Where did she learn this bad habit? Did she think that he would instantly understand her meaning just by hinting with her eyes? It's here. Duan Yu took a deep breath. Oh. Duan Yu had already completely accepted his fate. He stuffed the map back into his lapel, but in reality, he had thrown it back into his inner world. A black bead the size of a pigeon's egg appeared in his hands. Arbor recognized it at a glance. This bead had previously caused half of Hulun Mountain to tremble. She quickly tightened her grip on the rope with an expression that said, "If you dare to mess around, I'll kill you right now." Duan Yu twitched his mouth and grumpily said, "The passageway entrance is just below. I'll blow it up right now. Don't worry, with me here, the core ravaging thunder won't harm us in the slightest." Chapter 47. The core ravaging thunder was thrown down, and it exploded not far from their feet. The terrifying power did not spread to their bodies, as Duan Yu controlled it to a small area. After the pervading smoke dissipated, Arbor held the rope around Duan Yu's wrists and peered through a small head to take a look. The pile of rocks had been blasted into several puddles of stone powder by the core ravaging thunder's power. There was a pitch-black hole that was bottomless. "Let's go," Duan Yu urged from behind. "This entrance can move, and it will automatically seal itself when the time is up." Arbor turned to look at him meaningfully. This guy was very capable. He could directly tear open one of the entrances to the mystic realm with the power of a concealed weapon. Only this entrance can be torn open with force. The other entrances can't be torn open so easily. Duan Yu noticed Arbor's expression and explained. Arbor retracted her gaze and walked towards him. She shook the rope in her hand. "Go down and scout the way first." Duan Yu secretly ground his teeth. Who knew where she inherited her sinister and vicious personality from at such a young age? Duan Yu resigned himself to fate and took a step forward. Suddenly, a glint flitted through his eyes, and he abruptly jumped down without warning. Arbor revealed an icy smile. She released the rope and allowed him to freely fall. She even took a step forward and reached out to suck several large round rocks to her feet. Then, she kicked them down one by one with her toes. Ow! Duan Yu's desolate cry came from the deep pit. That brat suddenly felt as if he had dug a hole and buried himself in it. He originally wanted to suddenly jump down and pull that child down in passing to scare her, so that he could completely grasp the initiative for the rest of the journey. Presumably, that child was still a little old, and simply couldn't make a judgment and reaction in this kind of sudden situation. However, the child actually didn't hesitate to let go. Arbor cast a sidelong glance at the pitch-black hole, and her lips curled up as she softly said, "Idiot." Then he walked to the edge of the pit and slowly looked down. A straight and steep stone staircase was built along the side of the hole, completely hidden in the darkness. If one did not look carefully, they would not be able to see that there was such a staircase carved into the wall of the hole. Arbor slowly walked down the straight and steep stairs, counting the steps in his heart. When she counted to 100, a faint green halo slowly entered her eyes. The sound of flowing water drifted into her ears. It seemed that this was the end. When her feet touched the ground, she felt a warm and moist water flow into the soles of her shoes. The underground water has already flowed here? Arbor frowned slightly and walked a few steps forward. Then he saw Duan Yu sprawled on the ground, his face devoid of any meaning as he quietly gazed at him. Arbor pulled out the pharaoh from his conscience with a wave of his hand. He walked to Duan Yu's side and raised his right palm. Duan Yu's pupils contracted as he shouted, "Wait! My left arm's shoulder bone is already broken. I can't attack you in the short term. If you let me stay, I can guide you on how to refine the existing energy in the mystic realm for your own use." Arbor raised a brow and withdrew the ferrule, agreeing to his suggestion. However, her following actions were filled with savagery, without the slightest hint of friendliness. Chapter 48. When this youth leaped earlier, he had made up his mind to harm her. If she hadn't acted according to the situation and let go, she might have already been tricked by the youth. Even an adult wouldn't be able to withstand the gravitational drag at that speed, let alone a petite person like her. If her feet didn't touch the ground, she would be dangling in midair, and her entire body would be carried by that idiotic youth. What a joke! How could Arbor allow this kind of situation to happen? Behave yourself. Arbor gave the youth a fierce look, telling him to figure it out himself. She then reached out to grab the rope around Duan Yu's hand and dragged him forward. Below their feet was a small, gurgling stream. The water wasn't wide, but it meandered for a long distance. Not long after Arbor walked with Duan Yu, the scene before them started to brighten. Due to Duan Yu being hit by several boulders in succession when he fell, his entire body was covered in fine wounds except for his left shoulder bone, which was slightly fractured and couldn't be lifted. It could be seen how ruthless this little girl was back then. She didn't give him any face at all. Duan Yu had just opened his mouth to speak when he felt stars before his eyes. His mouth and tongue were so dry that he almost fainted. Arbor didn't notice his abnormality. At this moment, her eyes were almost completely fixed on the beautiful scenery before her. In her previous life, when she entered the paradise, this place had almost been completely reclaimed and excavated. Everything that should be looted was taken, and the entire mystic realm was nearly destroyed by those people. How could she see such a peaceful and beautiful scene now? The land of paradise looked like a secluded valley. The valley was surrounded by magnetite mines. The mountains rose and fell continuously, and the magnetite inside was innumerable. What entered her eyes was a small peach blossom forest. Beside the forest was a small, lush green lake with a relatively calm water surface. When they walked through the passageway, the stream beneath their feet also diverged from this small lake. The lake water looked rather clear and calm. Separated by the emerald lake surface, the nimble little fish swimming below could be seen clearly. This place was filled with a dense mystic energy aura. With such abundant profound energy, wanting to absorb it all within a few days was a fool's dream. Arbor frowned. She couldn't stay here for too long. If they didn't go home by nightfall, their mother, Wei Ziqin, would be worried to death. Therefore, Arbor shifted his gaze to the young man with his head tilted. He grabbed his wrist and pulled it hard. How do I refine it? Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, the young man fell to the ground with a bang. Xiaomu finally realized that something was wrong with the youth. She frowned and kicked him lightly. What are you doing? Don't play dead, get up. He was such a weakling. How could he be so weak after being hit by a few stones? The young man tried his best to open his mouth. He really wanted to tell this guy that he hadn't eaten or drunk anything for a few days. Now his hunger and thirst had completely broken out. He needed water and food to replenish his strength. The young man struggled to move his finger and wrote the word water on the green pine soil. Arbor frowned and looked down at him. Do you want to drink water? Men were so troublesome. Arbor pulled up the weak young man and directly dragged him to the side of the lake. Drink. Chapter 49. What? The youth's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. 10,000 giant beasts were roaring in his mind. The************* girl actually made him drink this kind of dirty lake water. Was this kind of thing for him to drink? It was so dirty. If it wasn't specially treated, wouldn't he have diarrhea after drinking it? How could that do? How honorable was his status? He had to drink filtered water at the very least. Give me dew water. Duan Yu weakly spat out these words. Seeing that his arm was broken, and he was already in such a miserable state, shouldn't the child be benevolent and extend a benevolent and friendly hand to support him? Reality proved that the child had long fed something like kindness to the dogs. Hearing Duan Yu's words, the child instantly snorted, and impatience and viciousness surged out of her eyes. She directly reached out to grab Duan Yu's long hair, and heavily pushed his head down, burying his entire upper body in the lake water. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. The miserable youth was caught off guard, and was forced to drink a large mouthful of water. He instantly felt that the entire world was filled with eerie malice towards him. A pff cough cough cough. The youth struggled but was pressed down by the child, so he gulped down another mouthful of water. Pfff, a cough cough cough. When Duan Yu's head could finally float to the surface, his upper body was drenched by the lake water. You. His handsome face was flushed red, and this was the first time he felt angry. Who the hell knew how many dirty floating things he had just swallowed? Who the hell knew if these things would overturn his stomach and cause him to be in so much pain that he wished he was dead? Arbor indifferently glanced at him, unable to conceal the disdain in his eyes. You. Are the people from your village all so careless? Do you know that I've never drunk this kind of dirty lake water since I was young? You. He was simply infuriated to death. Arbor finally understood why this guy was suffering from dehydration. So it turned out that he had never drunk any water because he despised other people's drinking utensils for being dirty. Arbor sneered, unable to conceal the mockery and indifference in his eyes. Despise it for being dirty? That's because a pampered young master like you has never experienced a real shortage of food and water. When you're at the last moment of your life, even if it's a piece of dried tree bark in front of you, or a bit of dirty water, you'll still eat and drink it. How can you be so unreasonable, kid? For survival. Arbor interrupted the boy's words. Looking at the boy's slightly stunned eyes, he said coldly, when the only thing left in your mind is to survive, you don't care about anything else. Clean? Dirty? Arbor smirked. Soon you won't be able to be picky. In the later stages of the zombie disaster in her previous life, the entire water source was destroyed, and it was difficult to find a clean water source on Seekong planet. No one could withstand this impending disaster. Pick. Arbor sneered. Before picking, one had to have the strength and life to pick. If the water at the bottom of such a clear lake was dirty, then what about those people who could even drink muddy water in the later stages? Duan Yu stared at the child in a daze. He felt that when the child said these words to him, the iciness hidden in the depths of her eyes was so sharp that it could freeze everything. She seemed to be looking at him, but it also seemed like she was looking at the near future through his face. Her indifferent eyes contained a trace of indifference and numbness. Duan Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the anger that was about to erupt in his heart. Just as he was about to speak, an arrow carrying a gust of wind pierced through the air and shot to his feet. Chapter 50. Ha ha. Goosebump-inducing laughter once again reverberated through this valley. A woman in a gorgeous peach-pink dress slowly appeared in front of them with a grin while waving the sandalwood fan in her hand. Following behind her were 20 to 30 people of all ages, both men and women. Brother Duan, thankfully you were leading the way, so we were able to find the mystic realm so effortlessly. Your Duan clan is truly worthy of being a hidden weapon scout patrician family that has been passed down for generations. Your grasp of information is truly accurate, ha ha ha. The woman blew a kiss in Duan Yu's direction and winked cutely with a smile. Arbor's small face stiffened slightly, and she resisted the urge to vomit as she turned to look at Duan Yu, who had an unsightly expression. You were the only one dilly-dallying over there. Now that they've caught up, hurry and take out that whatever thunder and give them one. The little girl nodded at Duan Yu with her chin and used her threatening gaze to tell him to hurry up and do as she says. Duan Yu cried uncontrollably on the inside. Sister, do you think that core-ravaging thunder is a cabbage that can be found on the street, and can be found as many as you want? It was very difficult to manufacture this kind of hidden weapon with great lethality. He only had 2 on him, and he had already used them all up, so where would he get more? Xiao Mu stared sharply at him, incessantly hinting at him with a ruthless gaze. The latter instantly understood in a flash, and he pretended to reach into his bosom to fumble around. But the core-ravaging thunder's power is enormous. If I throw it here, it might cause the entire secret realm to collapse, right? At that time it won't benefit either of us. Arbor suddenly chuckled. Duan Yu's fumbling motion froze as he stared dumbly at the little girl. He felt like he had never seen a second expression on her face other than apathy and indifference ever since he started interacting with her. But now the little girl was actually smiling? However, this smile was worse than not smiling. Her smile was so fake. She only let out a small chuckle, and her expression remained stoic without any change. Have you ever seen such an uncoordinated and unsynchronized smile? Give it to me. Duan Yu glared fiercely and reflexively took out something and handed it to Arbor. Arbor took it with his small hand and held it in his palm. He pretended to raise his right hand high and was about to throw it down. The crowd of Coitus sect disciples who were watching from the front almost had a heart attack. The woman screamed, "Stop, stop, stop, stop. Little girl, let's talk it over, let's talk it over." Arbor expressionlessly turned to the people from Acacia sect. "What's your name?" The woman was dumbfounded. She felt that there was something wrong with this commanding tone, but she didn't know if there was something wrong with her reflexes, but she actually replied reflexively, "Ha ha, Yao Ji, my name is Yao Ji. It's the left protector of the Coitus faction. Little girl, let's talk things over slowly, isn't that right?" What a joke! With the power of the core ravaging thunder, a single one of them could really destroy this secret realm. At that time, no one would be able to escape unscathed. What was the point of that? The Coitus sect was here to seek wealth. How could they just watch as so many magnetite mines in this mystic realm were about to be destroyed? How could one enter a treasure mountain and return empty-handed? Just thinking about it made one's heart ache. If this treasure ground was destroyed like this, retreat. Arbor clenched his right hand. The people from Coitus sect subconsciously took 2 steps back. Suddenly someone screamed from the crowd, "Aya, there's something." Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. It was as if several bolts of lightning flashed before everyone's eyes. The people who were attacked all fell to the ground in pain and clutched their wounds. Their complexions instantly darkened. Chapter 51. Arbor raised her eyebrows. From her angle, she just happened to see 4 of Coitus sect's disciples fall down in an instant. The unlucky person closest to her line of sight had not even been on the ground for a minute before his entire body turned into a dark green color. His eyes bulged and a dark green liquid flowed from the corner of his mouth. His head was tilted to one side and he was no longer breathing. It was obvious that he had been killed by a fatal poison in an instant. What a strong poison! It didn't even give people a chance to take the medicine and caused them to die on the spot. What's that? Yaoji turned her head with a chill running down her spine. She caught a glimpse of a white light flitting past the corner of her eye. She immediately flung out the sandalwood fan in her hand without hesitation. A strand of mystic energy was attached to the fan, and it suddenly collided with the white light. Chirp! The white light that was hit fell to the ground and the halo that surrounded it suddenly dispersed, revealing a palm-sized white furry squirrel. The little guy cleverly glanced at Yao Ji, who was glaring angrily at it, then turned around and scampered away. Arbor couldn't help but snicker in her heart. When this little white mouse appeared, it was flashy and savage, biting 3 or 4 people to death in a matter of minutes. I didn't expect it to be such a coward, turning around and running away when it saw the situation wasn't right. It's just that the direction it ran in without a head or tail. Yao Ji gnashed her teeth. She grabbed the sandalwood fan that had flown back into her hand and chased after the white squirrel with 2 leaps. She once again attached mystic energy to the sandalwood fan in her hand and attacked the little white mouse's head with lightning speed. Arbor took a deep breath and suddenly raised the black ferrule that slid out of her sleeve, blocking Yao Ji's attack head-on at an extremely fast speed. The moment the 2 forces collided, the black ferrule in Arbor's hand emitted a strong black halo and blocked Yao Ji's attack with a bang. Arbor's small hand that was tightly holding the ferrule was covered with tiny beads of sweat. She lowered her head to look at Inky in her hand and happily stroked it. Inky seemed to feel the little girl's joyous mood, and a layer of black mist floated on its surface. If it wasn't for Momo's strength, she would have definitely been sent flying by Yao Ji's charge. The moment the 2 of them came into contact, Arbor could clearly feel that the cultivation of the woman in front of her was not just a little bit higher than hers. Momo had blocked 80% of the power for her, and she had blocked the remaining 20%. However, her hand that was holding on to Momo still felt a faint pain. It was clear how strong that woman was. Arbor could feel the strength of the enemy. His heart was filled with fighting spirit, and his eyes shone brightly. Yao Ji's eyes widened in an instant as she stared at the little girl in front of her in shock. How could that be? Ah. She was well aware of her strength. She was a genuine peak level 7 mystic cultivator. With her cultivation, she could see through her opponent's cultivation with a glance. She was merely a level 3 mystic cultivator. He had not even reached rank 3 lower tier, but why? A level 3 mystic cultivator could actually block an all-out attack from a peak level 7 mystic cultivator? What kind of joke was this? Who would believe such a thing? Chirp. The little white mouse's eyes that were the size of croton beans revealed a human-like glint of tears. It stretched out its 2 short forelimbs and bounced toward Arbor with an expression of a savior asking for a hug. Arbor was momentarily speechless. The little white mouse reacted extremely quickly and swiftly climbed up Arbor's white skirt. After it reached Arbor's back, it buried its head in Arbor's hair and rubbed back and forth. Chirp chirp. The little white mouse grabbed a strand of Arbor's long hair and swayed its fluffy tail with an inexplicable expression of intoxication. Chapter 52. Duanyu, who was watching coldly from the sidelines, sneered. He dared to bet his 12 years of life that the little girl's motive for attacking definitely wasn't to save such an unimportant and adorable white mouse. In reality, because the little white mouse was fleeing in the direction of Arbor, and Yao Ji's mystic energy was rushing toward her, Arbor didn't have time to consider too much. She could only meet the attack head-on in order to block it without suffering any injuries. She was merely saving the little white mouse in passing. At this time, Arbor's face was stoic as she pulled the little white squirrel from her back to her eyes in disdain, and casually tossed it aside. With a whoosh, the pitiful little mouse was immediately tossed away by a certain child, and it was carried away by the wind. Duanyu's mouth twitched. He really didn't want to ridicule this savage child. Shouldn't a normal little girl be very happy to see such a furry and adorable creature? It was obvious that this black-hearted person wearing the skin of a little girl in front of him wasn't a little girl at all. Chirp squeak squeak. The little white mouse's bean-sized eyes were brimming with pitiful tears as it quickly hopped back. It followed the hem of Arbor's clothes, and used its 2 short front paws to grab onto a corner of her clothes. Arbor looked down and saw that clever little white mouse using its small, black eyes to look at her like a human. It swung around while tugging on the corner of her clothes before jumping onto her waist and slipping back onto her shoulder with a swish. Arbor was baffled. Where did this lively little white mouse pop out from? From her knowledge in her previous life, there were generally 2 types of mystic realms. One type was a mystic realm of inheritance set up by an otherworldly expert, a grotto heaven or an immortal's abode. These types had ferocious beasts placed inside to guard the mystic realm and test visitors. The other type was the one in front of her. It was naturally nurtured by heaven and earth and formed naturally after hundreds of years of spiritual energy. Before an outsider opened the mystic realm, this was a small world that was completely isolated from the outside world. There were mostly ores and spirit wood, and living creatures were rare. Unless it was a mystic realm that formed after thousands or tens of thousands of years, and formed its own natural laws, it could form a complete living world. At least, she had never heard of a poisonous squirrel appearing in this mystic realm in her previous life. Squeak squeak squeak. The little white mouse jumped excitedly on her shoulder. It blinked its small black eyes and a fawning expression appeared on its furry little face. Xiao Mu's small hand grabbed the white mouse again. Just as she was about to fling it thousands of miles away so that it would not be able to get close again, mystic energy that suddenly condensed from all directions froze her in place. The dense, profound energy congealed into a substantial cloud, completely pressing down on her body. What's more, the profound energy in the entire mystic realm from all directions was unceasingly gathering in her direction. This strange movement was quickly detected by Yao Ji and the others. Each and every one of them widened their eyes in fright as they looked left and right, watching as the flowing profound energy passed by them, and went straight to the little girl's side without any reluctance. How could this be? Yao Ji was so shocked that her eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. What was this stinky girl doing all of a sudden? Until a nearby coitus sect disciple asked in a trembling voice, "Little girl, are you refining all the profound energy in the mystic realm? How is that possible?" Yao Ji immediately let out a screech like a turkey. Her eyes stared straight at Arbor. What kind of joke is this? She's still so young. Forcefully refining all the profound energy in this mystic realm won't give her any benefits. She'll only explode. Chapter 53. While Arbor was in a daze, she immediately calmed herself down and sat cross-legged. With a grave expression, she slowly guided the profound energy that was surging from all directions into her profound veins. When the surging profound energy drilled into her body, Arbor suddenly felt like she couldn't breathe. She was very clear that her profound veins were currently very weak and couldn't absorb too much profound energy. What was called biting off more than one could chew? Being greedy might not necessarily have a good ending, and might even backfire. Therefore, not to mention how piercing the envious, jealous, and hateful gazes of Yao Ji and company were, Arbor didn't want to inexplicably absorb the profound energy from all directions at this time. The little fellow's face was heavy and solemn. She took a deep breath and tried her best to calm down. She couldn't be nervous. The more anxious the situation was, the calmer her heart was, and she couldn't lose her composure. She was suddenly stunned. Although her small face was paralyzed and the people around her couldn't see any clues, her heart was already in a perilous situation. What was going on? Her vision, that was originally focused on inspecting the weak profound veins in her body, was now stuck in her dantian. Only a level 10 mystic cultivator or above could see the dantian, but now? Who could explain to her why her dantian looked so different from her previous life? In her previous life, when she reached level 10 mystic cultivation, she had once seen her dantian. It was a ball of white fluid. She could clearly see that the milky white fluid flowed to the profound veins in her body and circulated in her body before finally returning to her dantian. Cultivation in a normal sense was firstly to strive to condense a mystic consciousness avatar to strengthen the mystic consciousness. Secondly, it was to repeatedly guide the profound energy to circulate around the body and strengthen the body's profound veins over and over again in a dull and tedious manner. If one didn't have a fortuitous encounter or a pill to expand the profound veins, normal mystic cultivators would continue to cultivate their profound veins and increase their profound energy. This was called bitter cultivation. Since the heavens had already given you profound veins that were different from normal people's, it naturally wouldn't allow you to easily reach the heavens in one step. Cultivation was raised bit by bit through daily practice. Her normal profound veins in her previous life actually mutated in this life. Now no one could tell her why her dantian felt like it was pitch black when she looked at it. It was as if there were stars twinkling in it. At first glance, it didn't look like a dantian at all. Instead, it looked like an inexplicable starry night. What was even stranger was that Arbor stared at his dantian in a daze. There seemed to be a thin and weak little tree growing inside. It looked weak and could fart at any time. But whose dantian could grow trees? What was the meaning of such a strange thing? Arbor felt that her little brain wasn't enough. She felt like she was about to explode on the spot. Was it okay for this tree to grow in her dantian? No wonder her profound veins were so much weaker compared to her previous life. Could it be that all the profound energy in her body had been absorbed as nutrients for this tree? Xiao Mu suppressed the urge to go berserk and took a deep breath to calm herself down. However, she didn't know that while she was able to calm down when she closed her eyes to study her dantian, the people from the coitus sect around her couldn't remain calm. Duan Yu also widened his eyes and stared fixedly at Arbor, as if he was looking at a monster. In less than 5 minutes, Xiao Mu's petite figure had already been enveloped by large lumps of dense mystic energy, and her tiny figure could no longer be seen clearly. A certain disciple from the coitus sect was unwilling to give up, and wanted to break through the profound energy barrier to stop Arbor from absorbing the profound energy. However, he was flung away by the eruption of profound energy when he reached the large masses of profound energy. He couldn't even get close to Arbor, let alone get close to her. Chapter 54. That dantian, which resembled a galaxy, was currently endlessly absorbing the rich mystic energy that poured into it like a tide. Arbor could even see that unreliable sapling stretching out its thin branches in great comfort. How infuriating. The mystic energy that she painstakingly cultivated was all absorbed by that sickly tree? It ate meat in big mouthfuls and didn't even leave her a mouthful of soup? Where was the justice in this? Arbor was overwhelmed with grief and indignation. She simply forgot that the mystic energy that was pouring in from all directions wasn't the result of her painstaking cultivation. It was simply a freebie. Moreover, there was no data that indicated that the mystic energy that she painstakingly cultivated day and night was all absorbed by the sapling. The sapling expressed that it wouldn't take the blame for this. Duan Yu opened his mouth, and his gaze met the old hag from the Coitus sect before shifting away. Sitting down openly at this time and crazily absorbing the profound energy here in front of everyone from Coitus sect. Only this savage girl would be able to do such a deranged thing. Duan Yu was completely unaware of Arbor's suffering. Arbor was still feeling bitter inside. She was forced to absorb the mystic energy purely to nourish the sapling. Who could she find to reason with? Yao Ji and the others were the most infuriated. They originally wanted Fong, to take the mystic energy here for her own use. But now? No matter how little mosquito meat there was, there should at least be some. Yao Ji promptly sat down cross-legged, looking like she was about to enter a cultivation state immediately. The Coitus sect disciples looked at each other before glaring covetously at Duan Yu across from them. 15 minutes later, Yao Ji angrily flung her sleeves and stood up because she discovered that she was purely wasting time. She sat there for half a day, yet she didn't even absorb a drop of mystic energy. This was simply inconceivable. She originally thought that the D*MN girl would explode and die in a few minutes, but in reality, it didn't happen. After such a long time, the little girl still sat there perfectly fine and continued to absorb mystic energy. Yao Ji's eyes were filled with fury, and she threw a glance at her subordinates. Several Coitus sect disciples braced themselves and rushed toward Arbor's figure that was enveloped in mystic energy. Their sabers flashed as they shouted angrily. Then after those few unlucky bastards were blasted out by the dense profound energy, there was no more after that. He simply couldn't injure the wretched lass who was wrapped in layers of profound energy, nor could he stop her from absorbing it. Yao Ji was so depressed that she was about to die. She could only shift her gaze to the surrounding magnetite mines. With a wave of her hand she said, "Take all the magnetite away." The 20 or so Acacia sect disciples looked at each other with a bitter look on their faces. There were a lot of magnetite mines in the mountains here. Would the 20 of them be able to finish mining in a few months? Hurry up. If the people from the other 4 gates follow us, we'll have no chance. Yao Ji pointed forward with both hands, and the 20 or so disciples all stepped forward, preparing to run towards the mine. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The entire earth was shaking, and the 20 or so disciples immediately fell and rolled on the ground. Yao Ji barely managed to steady herself, and she turned to look at Duan Yu with an unsightly expression. What happened? Duan Yu was also astonished. The paradise is about to collapse? What? Yao Ji's face instantly turned green as if she had swallowed feces. What kind of joke was this? She hadn't even fished out a single strand of hair from the paradise, alright? How could this place collapse just like that? Then what about these magnetite mines? Why did her heart hurt so much? Her magnetite. Chapter 55. Yao Ji madly charged toward the magnetite mine, and the 20 or so subordinates couldn't stop her. Halfway there, her subordinates pounced on Yao Ji one after another, hugging her waist and thighs as they held her down. They repeatedly exclaimed, "Lord Yao Ji, don't. My lord, hurry and leave. It'll be too late if you don't leave now. Magnetite, my magnetite." Ah. Yao Ji crazily grabbed the hair of one of her subordinates who was hugging her waist. She pulled out a few strands of that unlucky fellow's black hair, causing him to cry out in pain. The front half of his head became barren in an instant. The subordinates' tears streamed down. Why were they, the loyal and devoted subordinates, always the ones suffering? At this time, the thick mystic energy surrounding Xiaomu had dissipated at some point in time. When she stood up, she saw this chaotic scene, and the corner of her mouth twitched. They were all so old. Yet they didn't have any sense of modesty. Arbor silently disdained the chaotic crowd and completely ignored the dumbfounded Duan Yu beside her. You. Duan Yu gulped. When he saw that Xiao Mu didn't look at him from beginning to end, he involuntarily swallowed his words. Such a devilish little monster actually appeared in such a small and lousy village. Could it be that she was some reclusive senior's final disciple? Lord Yaoji. You can't go. The coitus sex subordinates hugging her thighs bitterly and silently shed tears. Lord Yaoji had stomped countless times on their backs. Yaoji held her head and howled in heartache. Her neat and elegant hair was messed up by her hands, and her head of pearls and jade was also crooked. Let's go. Yaoji recovered her clarity at the last moment and fiercely glared at Arbor. She turned around and led the coitus sect disciples toward the tunnel they came from. However, the tunnel actually disappeared. The group stood there dumbfounded as they watched the tunnel that connected the Mystic Realms Valley to the outside world warp and disappear before their eyes. The entire Mystic Realm was in the midst of collapse, so it was normal for the tunnel to disappear. Because at this time, even the surroundings of the valley were being squeezed continuously. The magnetite mine that was originally very far away from them seemed to be pushing towards them step by step. Yao Ji's pupils shrank, her face filled with horror. The speed at which this secret realm was collapsing was too fast. In less than a few minutes, the magnetite mines around them had already pushed in front of them. The circle of 20 to 30 people was continuously shrinking, and the terror in their eyes was about to overflow. Stupid girl, I'll kill you. It was all this wretched girl's fault. If she had not rashly absorbed all the profound energy in this place, how could such a strange change have occurred? Even if she died, she would drag this wretched girl down with her. As the outer ring shrank, they stood less than 100 feet from where they stood. Before they knew it, Arbor and Duan Yu had arrived beside Yaoji and the others. Yaoji could reach out and pat Arbor's back, and Arbor was carefully looking at the peach blossom forest and lake that were evaporating bit by bit as the secret realm collapsed. Sigh, she let out a long sigh. In her previous life, the paradise that produced so many fresh and juicy peaches was destroyed just like that. Her heart also ached. Originally, she could have used it to temporarily avoid disaster, but now it was completely gone. While she was pondering, Yao Ji's sinister face and mystic energy-covered palm approached her from behind. Arbor was about to dodge when he suddenly heard Yao Ji and the others shriek. When he turned around, he saw more than 20 people falling down like dumplings. A large hole had opened up in the ground at some point in time. Arbor glanced at it, and suddenly felt the air beneath his feet as he also fell down. Squeak, chirp, chirp. The white squirrel panicked when it saw Xiaomu running away, and it pounced on her in a panic. Chapter 56. The dozens of people's moods rose and fell like they were on a roller coaster. They thought they would be paralyzed from the fall, but they landed on the ground in the blink of an eye. They returned to the stone forest where they entered the mystic realm. A bunch of people rolled around defenselessly, their bodies bruised from all kinds of hard rocks. Xiaomu was quite lucky and plopped down on the back of Duan Yu's head. She looked up at the sky in confusion. She reflexively extended a fair and tender hand and watched as a round, fist-sized pearl slowly fell into her hand. The youth's face turned green on the spot. He arched his head, and his handsome face flushed red. Arbor quickly patted his butt and stood up. Duan Yu stood up as if there were springs under his feet, and angrily glared at Xiaomu. The child ignored him and looked down at the pure white pearl in her hand. Her eyes gradually narrowed. So strange. Why did she feel like there was a peach blossom forest and lake water inside this transparent pearl? It looked quite familiar, like a miniature version of the paradise. Xiaomu shook her small paws and turned the pearl upside down. She felt very magical as she watched the dark green lake water slowly ripple inside the pearl. This is the paradise's refinement. Duan Yu's eyeballs were about to fall out as he stared at Xiaomu in bewilderment. What are you doing? How did you do it? He thought this child was only refining and absorbing the mystic energy inside the paradise. He didn't expect her to be so deranged as to refine the entire paradise. This method of directly refining a mystic realm only existed in secret histories. Duan Yu had once read about it in an ancient book, but it was completely different from seeing it with his own eyes. No wonder the paradise was collapsing. Think about it, the entire paradise was refined by the child, so how could it not collapse? What reason was there for it not to collapse? The child looked back at Duan Yu with an "I don't know, and I didn't do it" expression, leaving him speechless. This child couldn't be the incarnation of some old monster, right? The paradise has been refined. Yao Ji reacted in an instant, unable to conceal the greed in her eyes. She grabbed the bead in the child's hand with one hand and struck the child's chest with the other. Arbor took a step back. His face was tense as he raised his black ferrule to block the attack. Boom. White mystic light scattered in all directions. Arbor forcefully suppressed his surging qi and blood, and looked coldly at the shocked Yao Ji. This time, Yao Ji used the full strength of a level 7 mystic cultivator, but she still couldn't harm the child in the slightest. Yao Ji was shocked, and a shadow was cast over her heart. What are you waiting for? Hurry and untie them. Duan Yu extended his bound hands to the child. This rope was quite interesting. No matter how hard the person who was tied up struggled, it was useless. However, an outsider only needed to gently pull at the knob to smoothly untie the rope. Arbor glanced at the young man, and did not make things difficult for him. He pulled the rope from his hand and stuffed it into his pocket for his own use. As soon as Duan Yu regained his freedom, he took out a handful of nails and casually scattered them. Yao Ji spun around and retreated, her eyes furious. Just as she was about to regain her balance, a shadow suddenly swept past her like a black gale. Its 5 fingers formed a claw that was as pale as 5 chicken bones as it grabbed at Arbor's shoulder. Yao Ji's expression changed drastically, and she angrily shouted, "Ghost Saber, you dare to snatch in broad daylight." At the same time, Duan Yu reflexively jumped forward. Perhaps he was also a bit dumbfounded. Why did he rush out at this critical moment to shield the D*MN child, and meet the Ghost Saber's claw head-on? Crack. Chapter 57. The poor youth's left shoulder bone was severely fractured by this black shadow's claw. Fine, adding insult to injury was his own doing. Duan Yu was still dumbfounded. He truly could not understand why his blood rushed to his head, and he used his body to shield this stoic child. Especially when he turned around and saw the child's expressionless face, he chuckled. Xiao Mu's eyes flickered, and she took a step back. Only then did she clearly see the attacker. It was a middle-aged man dressed in black with a short beard. His small eyes emitted a vicious glint as he stared straight at the round bead in her hand. "Hand over the heart of paradise, and I'll spare your life, child." The middle-aged man in black coldly said with downcast eyes with one hand behind his back. Arbor's lips curled up, and she abruptly tightened her grip on the bead. She raised her small hand, and a pure white mystic energy light emitted from her palm, and tightly wrapped around the bead. The child's stupefied expression, coupled with that pair of ferocious eyes, instantly made people's hearts tremble. Duan Yu glanced at the man in black and scoffed. "You want to take back something that fell into the child's hands?" Duan Yu had to hand it to her for being so naive despite her age. "You can give it a try. Will you snatch it faster, or will I destroy it faster? At worst, we'll break up, and everyone can forget about it," the child said coldly as she stared at the man in black. Even though the large group of sect disciples brought by the man in black were glaring at her, the child's expression remained stoic. However, her clear eyes radiated a vicious aura, and her back was ramrod straight. Her entire body exuded an aura of sharpness. Good. The middle-aged man in black glared venomously at the child. "Child, you're ruthless enough. You have some guts. Then tell me, what conditions do you want in exchange for giving the heart of paradise to me?" "You can't give it to him. Ghost Saber. You old bastard. I was the one who discovered the paradise first, and your ghost sect wants to interfere. Don't even think about it. Humph. The treasure is here, so we'll rely on our own abilities. Yao Ji, although the treasure is good, don't put the cart before the horse and lose your life for some good stuff. You have to think carefully about whether it's worth it or not." Ghost Blade. Yao Ji was so angry that her eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. She was currently in a disadvantageous situation, and the number of subordinates she had was obviously less than half of Ghost Sex. In addition, her own cultivation was not as high as Ghost Saber's, so she could only watch anxiously from the side. The child's bright eyes shone like pearls, 2 stars in the sky. Her gaze coldly fell on the group of greedy faces in front of her. Suddenly, she raised her small hand and directly threw the pearl into her mouth in front of everyone, swallowing it with a gulp. Duan Yu was dumbstruck as he watched from the side. This child seemed to be even more savage than he had imagined. On the other hand, Gui Dao, Yao Ji, and the others were caught off guard as well. When they finally reacted, their faces had turned green and distorted. Gui Dao pulled out the ghost head blade from his waist. He was so angry that he laughed and was about to attack. Earbook covered his abdomen with one hand and said coldly, "Do it. Do it. Do you believe that I'll immediately self-detonate and leave you with nothing? Not only will you not obtain the treasure, but you'll also have to die here with me. All of you will die here with me." Everyone looked at her, flabbergasted. Duan Yu felt that the child's actions really refreshed his normal worldview again and again. Was she still a child? Was this level of savagery normal? Chapter 58. Ghost Saber released a murderous aura as he glared at the child in front of him. His clenched fists made cracking sounds. "Kill me! Kill me! Come!" The child took a step forward with every word. Her soft and adorable voice sounded abnormally vicious in everyone's ears. Not to mention Duan Yu, even the surrounding people's worldviews were refreshed again and again. They felt that this child's viciousness was abnormal. You don't dare to attack? If you don't dare to attack, then die. Don't block the way. Trash. The child sneered with contempt in her eyes. You. Ghost Saber was so angry that he wished for nothing more than to slap this D*MN girl to death. Ever since he became an elder of the Ghost sect, he could do whatever he wanted. He had never been as sullen as he was today. D*MN girl, you're too arrogant and don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Ghost Saber shouted and grabbed at the child's slender arm with his left hand. Today, I'll let you know the difference in strength. Self-detonation? You don't have a chance. Ha. The distance between them was quite close, so Ghost Saber looked like he could easily capture her with this grab. Careful. Duan Yu hastily threw out a concealed weapon, but Ghost Saber did not even look at it and blocked it with his arm. He was focused on capturing the child. It would not be too late for him to cut open her stomach and take out the heart of paradise after he captured this brat and ruthlessly tortured her. Whoosh. To his surprise, the child flicked out a rope and quickly wrapped it around Ghost Saber's left arm. Before he could react, the child fiercely tightened the rope in his hand and kicked off with his left arm. The little one easily leaped over and sat on Ghost Blade's shoulder. The rope wrapped around Ghost Blade's left arm and quickly wrapped around his body. With a tight grip, the little one grabbed Ghost Blade's arm in his palm. Ghost Saber's current posture was strange. His left arm was draped over his right shoulder by the rope, and Duan Yu's nail had hit his arm. The child was facing him and happened to sit on the back of his hand. He was so angry that he raised his free right hand and was about to punch the back of the child's head. Bam! Child wasn't someone to be trifled with. She was one step ahead of him and slammed the ferrule on Ghost Blade's head. She quickly pressed the ferrule against his neck and said sternly, "Come on. Let's see who dies first." All around him were stiff figures, and their eyes were wide open. Who could tell them who was the one who taught this ghost-like child? Was he born cruel or something? Gui Dao felt the sticky blood dripping from his head. It dripped down his forehead and landed on the child's body. The child, however, completely turned a blind eye to it. She still had that wooden little face, but her eyes were abnormally bright. "Old man, tell your men to go and kill those people." Yao Ji's expression changed. "Don't play tricks. You know that. Perhaps I might not have been able to kill you just now, but now, we're so close to each other. Even if I can't kill them, I'll definitely drag you down with me." The child's eyes were inches away from his face. Ghost Blade felt like he could bite the child's head off like a ball if he opened his mouth. However, he couldn't move. Only now did he realize that the child's seemingly suicidal approach to him was actually a preemptive strike. The D*MN girl's intelligence was simply not proportional to her appearance, especially when she was right in front of him. Her eyebrows were bewitchingly raised as she leaned close to his face and whispered, "Have you died before? Do you know what death feels like?" For some reason, Ghost Saber felt chills all over his body, and a chill slowly crept up from the bottom of his heart. How was this pair of eyes like a living person's? Chapter 59. Ghostblade's pupils dilated as he looked at the little girl in front of him. She made a sound that sounded like she was laughing, but her face didn't move at all, and there was no smile in her eyes. Her voice and expression were two completely different worlds. She was clearly a cute little girl, but she didn't have the slightest hint of softness and cuteness. Instead, he felt that she was filled with an eerie ghostly aura. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this child was more like a ghost than the members of the ghost sect. "What are you waiting for? Do it." A hint of impatience appeared in Arbor's eyes. Yaoji started to look nervous. "Ghostblade, think carefully. Even if you kill us now, with this girl's inhumane and rotten personality, she won't give you the heart of paradise. Why don't we work together? Kill them." Arbor suddenly exerted more force on the ferrule and pressed it down on Ghostblade's neck. "Otherwise, you'll accompany me to the hell of all evil. Don't be afraid. Hell isn't as scary as you think. It's just a bit empty, desolate and silent, that's all." Ghostblade's body trembled. He didn't want to admit that he was actually scared by this ghostly girl in front of him. "Little Jojo, you're being naughty again." Suddenly, an ethereal and gentle voice came close and reached her side in a moment. It was the voice of that god of plague. Student Arbor was a bit confused. Why did it feel like she was running into that god of plague everywhere? While she was thinking, her little body broke free of Ghostblade's grip and was pulled over by a strong suction force. She flopped twice and fell into a certain person's arms. Slap. The beautiful young man in white reached out his hand and slapped the child's buttocks heavily with a calm expression. His calm expression was completely inconsistent with his decisive action. Xiaomu even felt her but hurt from the force of the slap, and her old face instantly flushed red. What the hell? Adding up her 2 lifetimes, she was already more than 30 years old. Yet she was actually spanked by a demonic young man in broad daylight. This? The heavens clearly showed where the human heart was. A certain child who was about to throw a tantrum turned his head to glare at the youth and kicked him with his leg. She didn't know why, but she always felt that this young man's smiling, gentle and intelligent appearance was suppressing a violent heart. It was clearly a jade-like, handsome face that was like a spring breeze, but it actually made her feel the savagery and ruthlessness in the depths of his eyes, as well as the anger that surged along with it. The little kid was a little scared for no reason. Then he became angry. How could he be scared? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but raise his voice. "What are you doing? Let them kill each other. How do you want to end it after you've dealt with them?" The young man's voice was gentle, completely ignoring the dagger-like glint in the child's deliberately widened eyes. Xiaomu looked at his smiling eyes and subconsciously swallowed her saliva. For some reason, she felt a little guilty. She then angrily flung her sleeves. What was she feeling guilty about? A certain child reacted quickly and glared at him angrily. "What does it have to do with you?" Pa. Her little butt was hit again. The smelly brat's attack was even heavier than before. She was so angry that her old face turned ashen. Her little teeth rubbed against each other, and she wanted nothing more than to bite off the young man's slightly tanned neck. How dare he? Spanking her butt again and again? Actually, there was no third way, but Xiaomu was really furious. Life isn't easy. You have to cherish it. Emolian stared at her with a solemn and serious gaze, and stopped smiling like a spring rain. Chapter 60. He really couldn't understand how a child could be so ruthless and completely disregard her own life in such a desperate situation. Especially when he heard her soft voice murmur, "Hell isn't as scary as you think. It's just a bit empty, desolate and silent." He didn't know how to feel. What kind of courage and willpower did one need to truly disregard life and death? She was still so young. What exactly had happened to her that made her so indifferent to life and death? As for Arbor, how are you going to deal with them after you deal with them? In fact, she also knew that today's situation was almost a hopeless situation with no chance of survival. Her chances of winning were very small. If she made a mistake, she would die without a burial ground. Of course, she didn't plan to self-destruct. What she did before could only buy her some time. She wasn't afraid of death at all. She was just a bit unwilling. Of course, she didn't reincarnate to seek death. She wanted to live well. However, in that situation just now, even if she obediently handed over the heart of paradise, would this group of greedy people really let a child like her go? She was prepared to die, but if she took a gamble, she might still have a chance to live. At this moment, hearing this kid whisper in her ear, "Life isn't easy. You have to cherish it." Her heart couldn't help but tremble slightly. Although she knew this kid was worried about her, after being hit twice in a row where she shouldn't have been hit, the child's old face really couldn't swallow it. The child snorted and kicked him a few times. She looked down and saw that Crown Prince Lien's fine white robe had 7 or 8 black footprints printed on it. "Let go," the child said with a stoic face. Emo Lien shook his head and hugged her even tighter. He patted her back twice. "That won't do, it's dangerous right now. I'll put you down after we've dealt with these people, okay?" Although Crown Prince Lien asked okay, his movements didn't seem to relax at all. He clearly didn't intend to let go. That okay was just a casual question. The child was so angry. She had spoken so much to that whatever blade from the ghost sect. Now that she thought about it, she felt as if she had used up all her energy. She really didn't have any desire to speak, so she simply glared at Crown Prince Lien and shut her mouth. "Didn't I say that you can look for me anytime if you need anything in the future? Remember to call me next time. For example, in such a dangerous situation. Isn't it just right to call me? Don't worry, we can get rid of these annoying fellows in minutes." Xiaomu really didn't want to ridicule him anymore. "Do you think you're a Xian beast that can run out and fight as soon as you're summoned?" Moreover, everyone knew that only mystic cultivators above level 10 had the chance to contract with mystic beasts, okay? With her current cultivation as a little level 3 mystic cultivator, she should see reality as soon as possible. Emo Lien smiled as she looked at the child's puffy cheeks. "You don't believe me? Look." His slender fingers slightly pointed upwards, and Arbor's eyes involuntarily looked up. His almond eyes, which were originally slightly squinted, suddenly widened. Fire? Bright red, scalding flames, each the size of a fist, descended from the sky like a celestial maiden scattering flowers and attacked the flabbergasted ghost saber, Yao Ji, and the others. Xiaomu reflexively reached out to cover her head, but she quickly discovered that the flames didn't come at her head at all. Instead, they directly bypassed her and Crown Prince Lien, and chased after the others with whooshing sounds. Before long, half of the stone forest was engulfed in a sea of fire. Chapter 61. What is this? Ghost Saber hurriedly channeled mystic energy to block the flames, but the mystic energy enveloping his body was instantly incinerated by the scorching flames. Ghost Saber and the others were suddenly exposed to the fire, and before they could recover from their fright, they smelled the burning smell of people being roasted alive. To their horror and despair, the burning smell did not come from anywhere else but from their own bodies being roasted. Ghost Saber instantly turned into a burning man. His entire body was covered in flames as he blankly ran around, flailing his arms and pouncing on several unlucky ghost sect disciples. The heavenly fire descending from the sky instantly swallowed everyone into the sea of fire. No matter how they struggled or screamed, it was to no avail. Arbor, who was watching from the side, was rather calm. He slightly raised his head to look at the smiling Crown Prince Lien. This brat was truly a hypocrite. He was an incomparably ferocious fellow, but he wore a handsome and elegant facade like a banished immortal. He really knew how to act. However, on account of him taking care of this group of idiots, Xiaomu felt that the Crown Prince seemed to be a bit more pleasing to the eye today than in the past. No matter what, this brat had saved her life, so she could consider the matter of him spanking her butt and humiliating her old face, in front of everyone a foregone. Emolienne tapped her finger, and took out a coiled hemp rope from the fire. A faint smile appeared on her lips. It's actually the spirit binding rope. This little toy is quite useful. The child naturally reached out to take it, and frankly confiscated the hemp rope, casually stuffing it into his clothes as his own. Emolienne couldn't help but smile. This child was truly adept at silently collecting treasures. Every time he did something bad, his face would be stoic and serious. He was truly adorable. She couldn't resist pinching the child's fleshy cheeks, but she received an unhappy glare from a certain child in return. Slap. She forcefully slapped his hand away, and suddenly recalled the miserable Duanyu. He couldn't have been swallowed by the sea of fire, right? This miserable fellow had saved her just now. Arbor twisted his small body and turned half a circle. His gaze swept back and forth in the sea of flames, searching for Duanyu's whereabouts. However, aside from where she and Crown Prince Lien were standing, fire was spreading everywhere in the stone forest, and visibility was extremely low. Arbor couldn't find any trace of Duanyu after searching for a long time, and her delicate brows involuntarily furrowed. Don't worry, the kid from the Hidden Weapons family has the ability to protect himself, so he would have run away long ago. Emolienne turned her little face back. Let's go home. It was time to go home. With such a delay, it was estimated that it would take an entire night. Mother was probably going crazy with anxiety. Arbor lowered her eyes and subconsciously looked into her dantian. She saw that the heart of paradise that she had swallowed was being hugged by the two intertwining branches of the sapling. It was strangely tight, as if it was hugging it. Arbor blinked and tried to squeeze the little tree with his profound energy, making it let go. Who would have thought that the sapling would throw out a few more soft branches, holding on tightly without letting go? It freaking became a spirit. Arbor angrily withdrew her mystic energy. She couldn't understand why there was a strange tree growing in her dantian. Was there really no problem with this dantian? Wouldn't it hinder her cultivation on the right path in the future? No, she had to try again. Xiaomu held her breath and drew out a large amount of mystic energy stored in her mystic meridians. She directly transferred it into her dantian, and fought with the sapling for the heart of paradise. Chapter 62. The two sides fought a tug-of-war for a while before the sapling finally let go unwillingly. However, the strange thing was that Arbor seemed to be able to sense the sapling's indignation. He could even see it wailing in her dantian, shaking its trunk, and shaking its branches to point at the heavens and curse the earth. Haha! How could a tree become a spirit? Was this dantian still her dantian? Did she still want to make the decision? Did they ask for her permission before becoming a spirit and causing mischief? This kind of abnormal behavior should be ruthlessly slapped to death before talking about it. Jojo. Xiaomu recovered her wits and pushed away Emolienne, who was close to her face. She opened her mouth and spat out a round, jade-like bead. How do I use this? Those people wanted to snatch her heart of paradise with twisted expressions. They couldn't have some ulterior motive, right? Yushio, who had just finished taking care of some lackeys, appeared with a person in his hand and stared at the round bead in the little fellow's palm in astonishment. Wow, that's a miniature version of the paradise? How did this savage little girl refine the entire paradise and take it for herself? A hint of surprise also flitted through Emolienne's eyes, but it was more of a smile. He raised his hand and rubbed the little fellow's head. You're a child with good fortune. He didn't ask her the reason behind the paradise's refinement, which made the little fellow feel a bit better. To be honest, even if he asked, she wouldn't freaking know what had happened. However, she had a faint feeling that the paradise's direct refinement was most likely related to the tree that suddenly appeared in her dantian. However, she wouldn't tell anyone about such a strange thing like having a tree in her dantian. Moreover, with her current cultivation as a small level 3 mystic cultivator, being able to see her dantian was not a normal thing in the first place. Emolienne didn't say anything else and directly instructed Xiaomu to permeate her mystic energy into the heart of paradise. The bead immediately released a dazzling light and instantly soared into the air. As if drawing a mirage in the air, the entire paradise was endlessly magnified in front of her eyes. Within minutes, a translucent valley appeared in the sky. The sound of a gurgling stream and the fragrance of a peach tree assaulted her senses. Most importantly, the undulating magnetite mines around the valley were now in this miniature version of the heart of paradise. She could use them at any time. Little Qiao had lived for 2 lifetimes, so there weren't many things that could excite her. However, at this moment, even if she was mature and calm, she couldn't help but feel excited. Yu Xiu was already dumbfounded, his eyeballs almost falling to the ground. Who would have thought that the peach blossom spring that so many noble clans had been searching in secret to no avail would actually be refined into the heart of peach blossom by an unknown little girl from a mountain village? With a thought, Arbor moved the unburned stones under her feet to the paradise. With another thought, the stones returned to their original position. Ha 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 ha. This was truly a treasure. Great, I can finally store and withdraw items as I please. It wasn't like that damned inner world where he couldn't take things out without enough mystic sense. This peach blossom spring only needed a little mystic energy to take out large items. It simply couldn't be any more convenient. The child immediately grinned happily. Her paralyzed expression showed signs of cracking for the first time, and a strange smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Crown Prince Lian, who was staring at her, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This little fellow's smile was so strange, as if she had never smiled before. The corners of her mouth were stretched rather stiffly. Chapter 63. If the Crown Prince knew that the reason why the little fellow was so happy was only because the heart of paradise could allow her to store and withdraw items as she wished, he probably wouldn't know what to say. Her expectations were too low. Furthermore, our dear student Arbor still didn't know that every time she wanted to retrieve the heart of paradise, she would have to fight with the strange tree for it. Would it really be easier than using her own inner world? Before retrieving the paradise, our dear student Xiao Mu had even secretly tested whether she could send herself into the paradise. In the end, it was obvious that she had thought too highly of herself. Her original body couldn't enter the miniature paradise. Our dear student Xiao Mu pursed her lips and looked worriedly at the undulating magnetite veins outside the paradise. These magnetite veins had to be truly mined. Since her original body couldn't enter, she probably wouldn't be able to extract large amounts of magnetite veins just by relying on a wisp of mystic energy. Sigh, Arbor felt a little regretful. She retrieved the round bead and swallowed it in one gulp. Using her inner sight, she indeed saw the sapling caressing the heart of paradise back and forth, looking as if it wouldn't give up even if it died. Arbor felt even more of a headache. If she couldn't figure out this demonic tree, she wouldn't be at ease with her dantian. If the thickness of one's mystic veins was not only related to the amount of mystic energy one possessed, but also directly affected one's cultivation speed in the later stages, then the dantian was even more important. It was the place where all the mystic energy in the body was stored. The mystic energy cultivated in the mystic veins would eventually return to the dantian. And such an important place was currently occupied by an inexplicable tree. This made her feel uneasy. Arbor looked back at Mo Lian and happened to see him clench his fingers. A fiery red object in the shape of a lampwick floated into his palm. He lightly grasped it, and it disappeared into thin air. The child curiously grabbed his hand and flipped it open to take a look. There was nothing there. What was that just now? Although this crown prince looked gentle, Arbor felt that this brat's methods were very cruel. Crown Prince Lian said indifferently, "Oh, that's Ghost Saber's life lantern. For a second-rate sect like the Ghost sect, the elders, protectors, or consecrators would usually light up an everlasting life lamp in the sect. The moment the life lamp is lit, these people's life spirits will have a connection with the life lamp." Arbor immediately understood and nodded. Ghost Blade is dead now. That's right, he's dead. The life lamp that he lit in the sect also went out. What about the wick just now? That is the miniature life lamp that is engraved in his life soul. When a person dies, This miniature life lamp will quickly capture the scene of the last moment. It can quickly transmit the cause of the incident to the sect. So just now that grab had taken away Ghost Blade's last hope. This was the difference in strength. The suppression of cultivation made you so miserable that you didn't even have the chance to send a message. Yu Xiu waited for his master to finish explaining to the village girl before taking 2 steps forward with the person in his hand. Master, this woman has a mystic weapon that repels fire. This subordinate has already destroyed it. A tattered sandalwood fan that had withered into 2 halves was thrown to the ground by Yu Xiu like trash. Only now did Arbor see clearly that the woman he had thrown to the ground without any pity was Coitus Sect's left protector, Yao Ji. Yao Ji had long since lost her graceful and charming appearance. She sat on the ground like a beggar. Her hair was disheveled, her face dirty, and her eyes red. Chapter 64. Her hair was like weeds from the fire, and locks drooped down from her head. Her lips were slightly cracked from the heat, and she sat there in a daze with a confused expression. Yu Xiu went up and kicked her, then turned to say to Emolian, Master, this woman is pretending to be crazy and acting dumb. Yao Ji wasn't acting dumb like Yu Xiu said. She had indeed been scared silly. Coitus Sect was considered an upper-class sect. But even she, a left guardian with a rather lofty status in the sect, had never seen someone who could destroy so many people with a flip of his hand. It was as if they were ants in his eyes. Everyone, including the level 8 mystic cultivator Ghost Saber, couldn't survive for more than 3 seconds in this youth's hands. A trace of fear overflowed from the bottom of Yao Ji's heart. Emolian didn't even bother to look at her and merely said coldly, Clean it up. This kind of trash dared to attack little Jojo. She was an eyesore and truly lived up to the saying that she valued money more than her life. Emolian's words seemed to have triggered a certain nerve in Yao Ji. She howled and pounced forward, repeatedly begging for mercy, but Emolian unceremoniously kicked her far away. After receiving the order, Yu Xiu didn't waste words and aggressively pulled out his sword and walked toward Yao Ji. Seeing that the sword was about to land on Yao Ji's head, the latter was so frightened that her face drained of color, and she shrieked. Wait! The little girl suddenly stretched out 5 fingers. Yu Xiu's chopping motion froze in midair. Emolian cast him a sidelong glance and waved her hand to dismiss him. She lowered her head to look at the little girl in her arms. What is it? Do you dislike the smell of blood? I'll have someone throw her far away and dispose of her. Yu Xiu. Master is starting to be particular. But aren't you afraid of leading the little girl astray by saying this in front of such a savage and unrestrained little girl? Looking at the 2 people's relaxed expressions, those who didn't know would think that the 2 of them were chatting about the weather and the weather. Arbor tilted his small head. Is there any way to make her listen to me? I don't dare to have any thoughts of resistance. Why do you want such a trash? Emolian pursed her lips in disdain. She patted her head and said, If you need help, I can get Yu Xiu to follow you. Yu Xiu wanted to cry. His Highness was sending him away without any reluctance. Xiao Mu unceremoniously slapped the back of his hand. You're not allowed to touch my head. She was not a stuffed animal. We need to keep this woman. Arbor stared at Emolian, who was right in front of him. Is there any way? Emolian nodded. Arbor knew that this guy had a way, and this method was quite straightforward. Emolian raised her hand and sucked Yao Ji's head into her hand, suppressing it and extracting a strand of her life spirit. Regardless of how tragic Yao Ji's cries were, Emolian handed a thin, transparent strand of life spirit to Xiao Mu in just a few seconds. If she doesn't listen, you can crush this strand of life spirit in your hand at any time. At that time, she naturally won't have a good ending, Emolian said calmly. Arbor's eyes brightened. He nodded and threw the strand of life spirit into his inner world. It wouldn't take much mystic sense to extract a small life spirit. Actually, if he absorbed this strand of life spirit into his conscious, it would be more convenient to control it with mystic sense. However, her mystic sense body had just formed, and there was very little mystic sense in her conscious. To avoid any unexpected changes, it was better to lock up this life spirit in his inner world for now. Chapter 65. Arbor had finally witnessed Emolien's methods. Not only did she not find them cruel, she even found them to be very agreeable. The woman in front of her could even lay her hands on a 7-year-old child. It could be considered karma for her to end up like this. Yao Ji, who had a strand of her soul taken away, slumped to the ground listlessly. She shot a resentful gaze at Arbor, as if she wanted to bore a hole in her face. Arbor did not care about this gaze at all. However, Emolien was displeased when she saw the old woman's gaze. She raised her hand and slapped her across the air. If you dare to look at people like that again, I'll gouge your eyes out. Yao Ji flipped over from the strike and fell limply to the ground. She spat out a mouthful of blood and lost a few teeth. Her eyes were filled with horror and fear, replacing her previous resentment. The child expressionlessly said, "Come here." Yao Ji subconsciously shrank back and struggled to crawl to the two. This time, she did not dare to raise her head to look at these two fiends. "I know you're resentful." The child raised her small brows. "Do you regret not killing me in the beginning?" Yao Ji trembled, as if she could feel the white-clothed youth's sword-like gaze landing on her. Yao Ji had suffered before, so how would she dare to act rashly? She lowered her head and crawled at their feet. "Little master, please forgive me." Yao Ji does not dare. Arbor indifferently glanced at her. "How will you talk about today's matter when you return to the sect?" Yao Ji hastily replied, "Little master, don't worry. Yao Ji will not say anything." Arbor unhappily cut her off. "Why are you so stupid at your age? If you don't say anything, wouldn't it be even more suspicious? So infuriating. Why is it so troublesome to talk to idiots?" Xiao Mu's gaze shifted to Crown Prince Lien's face. She blinked and gave him a look. Emolien almost laughed out loud. Beside her, Yuxiu could not help but roll his eyes. "Child, what do you think His Highness is in your stomach? One look from you and others will immediately understand. After you go back, tell them that a mysterious expert killed all of you. It wasn't easy for you to escape back to report the news, so you have to act more realistically." After he finished speaking, he flicked his sleeve and sent the unlucky Yao Ji flying several meters away. Yao Ji let out a miserable howl as she spat out a large mouthful of blood. One of her arms hung limply by her side, obviously broken. Her face was completely pale, and with her withered hair and beggar clothes, no one would believe that she wasn't a beggar. "If you dare to come back and cause trouble, then there's no meaning for your sect to exist." Emolien glanced at Yao Ji and waved her hand. "You'll know what to say when you return." I understand. Yao Ji immediately let out a sigh of relief. She repeatedly kowtowed and fled. Arbor's eyes flashed. Speaking of which, she didn't care if this group of people rushed back to seek revenge. Counting the days, this peaceful world wouldn't last for more than 2 days. When the time came, it was hard to say if this village would still exist. What was there to be afraid of? She already planned to leave. However, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. She also couldn't be sure if those two sects would send people to investigate. If they found out that she was the one who obtained the Heart of Paradise, it would be annoying if they bit her like rabid dogs and refused to let her go. "Little Jojo, I'm leaving tomorrow to return to the capital. Don't do those dangerous things alone. When the moon is dark and the wind is strong, don't wander around too much, okay? I'll come back to see you after a while." You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.